Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It being 6:30, we shall begin. For those of you who've come to watch the meeting of the Committee of the Council, I'm terribly sorry to disappoint you, but we're going to hold that last this evening. I hope those of you who want to stay on for that event when we set next year's council tax will do so. Otherwise, I intend to run through the Cabinet agenda in the order that it is printed, beginning with the fire evacuation procedures, which I have to tell you that there are no plans for a fire alarm this evening. Therefore, should the fire alarm sound, please evacuate the building, and the fire exits are located at the rear and sides of this room, which you can see marked above the doors. Please go down the stairs and then meet in the War Memorial Park. Secondly, to advise you that this evening's proceedings are being webcast, and what that means for those of you who are not used to that is that they are made available on the council's website live at the moment, but that also a recording is made of the proceedings, which is retained in the archives and is always accessible to anybody who wishes to review it later on. So please be aware that though this is a public meeting, normal laws of the land rule in the meeting in terms of civil and legal and criminal responsibility. So please be aware that everything that you may choose to say will be being taken down, and somebody might choose to use it in evidence against you at a later stage. In terms of the next item is declarations of interest. We have two apologies to receive, first of all from Councillor Jaya-Wardner and secondly from Councillor Finney. That is because they are members of the Manydown Executive Committee and as such represent the landowning side of the council and therefore will not be able to take part in the discussions on item 13, which is the substantial issue this evening. We also have two declarations of interest, I think, from Councillor Mrs. Still and also from Councillor Isaac, who are both also members of that same Manydown Executive Committee, and they will not be taking any part in the discussions once we reach that item, but we certainly need Councillor Isaac because he's got to introduce one of the items, the item that we get to before then. If we can just confirm the minutes, members, please, of the previous meeting. Paper A, correct? Agreed. Good, thank you. I will sign those later on. Urgent items, we have none. Referrals from full council, we have two. Firstly, the referral on disabled access, which I think was from the 13th of December. Councillor Mrs. Ostleton?
Yes, can I just say that with the monies that we have now got, we are looking at disability access budget as requested at the last council. It is in hand at the moment. Thank you.
And secondly, on affordable property, Councillor Golding.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, as I said when we discussed this before Council, this is in principle a good idea and something we're already working on. There are a lot of details to be worked through. We don't have a scheme that we would wish to apply it to immediately, but I intend to I have asked officers to work on the details and bring a report to Housing and Environment, Ofcom, in due course, so that we can consider it further with the views of that committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was one item which I skipped over inadvertently, which was the member and public participation. It's because I intend to take all member and public participation on the item itself when we get to it on item 13, rather than to separate the two by another item. Can I just at this stage, for your benefit, say that there is normally 2 minutes per speaker allowed. You get one go only, so it's 2 minutes per person. In this particular case, I'm going to actually allow 2 minutes for speaking and an extra 30 seconds for summing up at the end, but I will stick exactly to the 2 minutes and 30 seconds because at the current state of play we have something like 51 people wishing to speak. Now, all I can say is that we have been through the list of subjects on which people wish to speak, and I'm not sure there are 50 different points that are going to be made during the course of the evening. So if you find that somebody has already said what you wish to say, please rest assured that repetition doesn't actually strengthen any particular argument. If you can get together amongst yourselves to agree maybe one person to speak to make several points, that will be tremendously beneficial. But I'm not going to stop anybody from having their say if they wish to. It's just that it will prolong the whole evening, obviously. So if you want to think about that while we'll go through the next item, which is two elements. One is references and reports from other committees. There are none. Petitions, there are none. So we'll move straight on to item 11, which is the non-executive issues for comment and recommendation to full council, the delivery of the treasury management investment strategy. So we'll take items 11 and 12 together. We're referring here to paper B on the agenda for those of you who have copies of the agenda and papers. And to introduce that, Councillor Isaac.
Thank you, Leader. This is a report to Cabinet on the delivery of the Treasury Management Investment Strategy. And it relates to how best to invest prudently our financial resources to generate the interest we rely upon to deliver our objectives, including future investment for the benefit of our residents in such things as infrastructure, new homes, green investment, top of the town and Basing View. The current strategy has served us very well for the last 7 years, but it's been necessary to review that in response to a climate of low interest rates, which is impacting on the returns we generate. And that climate's not likely to change as far as we can see into the future. So following a review by our independent advisors, this report recommends selling out of our existing gilt holdings to take a capital gain of somewhere in the order of £5.8 million and to reinvesting in different asset classes, either through collective funds or by using segregated fund managers. We're going to need further expert advice on that asset allocation, and that will be commissioned for our long-term strategic cash. The point of this is it's going to require changes to certain investment limits, which will need full council approval in due course. So I move the paper.
Thank you, Councillor Isaac. There are no speakers on this particular subject. Members, is there anybody who wishes to make a point on this? If not, I think we can agree it is a very sound step forward. Agreed? Agreed. Good. And thank you, Councillor Isaac. And thank you, Councillor Mrs. Still, because we're now moving on to item 13. I have a list of speakers here, which runs over several pages, as you will see. What I've tried to do is to group speakers into themes as best I can, so that we get all those people wishing to speak on one particular subject, speaking one after another. It may be that I have not actually succeeded in that because not everybody was quite as specific as others in determining what it was they wished to speak upon. If you feel that actually when I call your name you would rather be speaking at a later stage on another subject, then please say so at that time and we'll try to defer your speaking opportunity, but just make the point that everybody only gets one opportunity to speak, not multiple ones because they wish to speak on multiple subjects. Before I ask Councillor Sherlock to introduce the paper, let me just, I think, refresh our minds as where we are in this process. That the purpose of this evening's paper is to determine the next stage in an ongoing process. No decisions are being made tonight on final selection of sites for development in the future. What is being decided upon tonight is a preferred scenario for evaluation in terms of various other aspects that need to be looked at for each site and collectively as a group of sites. But clearly, some sites may fall out as a result of further evaluation work. We may need to look at other sites at other times. This is all ongoing work. There are other issues that are still to be defined. The most important of those is the housing number. We are working to a provisional housing number at the moment, and it was originally identified, still is identified as between 730 and 770. The work is still continuing. New figures are due out from central government during the course of March and April, which may have an effect on that. So we're not able to finalise the actual number, and clearly, until we finalise the actual number of houses that we require, we can't finalise the total number of sites that will be required to meet that number. That is inevitably ongoing work. Similarly, there are a number of studies, particularly the transport study, that still needs to be done, both individually for sites and also for the overall impact, as well as reviewing the environmental studies, the water cycle study, the landscape study, various other studies that follow on from those. So all of those need to be reviewed and, if necessary, refreshed before we get to a stage of being able to make a final decision. So please bear that in mind when making your comments, because you may find that many of them, whilst we will take note of them this evening, and we will make sure that they are recorded so that there is a note of what has been said, and that your comments are taken into consideration when carrying out those studies. It may well be that the answers can only emerge from those studies rather than be given at this moment in time. So with that said, can I ask Councillor Sherlock to introduce the paper, and then we will call our various speakers. Councillor Sherlock.
Thank you, Leader. This paper is the decision notice for the suggested sites, and I would just like to point out that in the decision notice it is headed suggested sites, but on paragraph 6, last line of paragraph 6, it refers to agreed sites, and that should be, the word agreed should be deleted because there are only suggested sites. So, can you not hear? That better? Right. I was pointing out that paragraph 6 of the decision notice, and the last line, the word agreed should be deleted because they are only suggested sites, not agreed sites. And the paper is headed suggested sites in the front. Anyway, these are the suggested sites and locations for the formulation of our local plan. Besides the Pacific sites, it includes in the proposal to encourage further sites chosen by the neighbourhood plans, which are in the making. There are also 3 robust paragraphs relating to the provision of adequate infrastructure, and it further recommends that officers carry out a review of the settlement policy boundaries. Finally, it recommends that a review of the likely delivery of the local plan in 2020 and agrees that the pre-submission local plan be considered by Council prior to public consultation later this year. Thank you. I commend it.
Thank you very much. So we will begin, and I'm intending to I've roughly ordered this in terms of the number of speakers who wish to speak, and for which the prize for the most speakers goes to Overton. But after that, I think the order of who wishes to speak in which order on Overton is somewhat potluck. But I'm intending to begin with Lucy Sloan-Williams from Overton Parish Council. Could you please come down to the front so that we can see you and also you can be seen? And if you want to sit at the seat there. Now, there is, and all the rest of the speakers, you have in front of you a microphone. The large, long button there is the thing which turns it on. I have a timer here, which
Okay.
you'll notice little lights come up on there. You have 2 minutes, and then I will tell you when you get to 2 minutes and ask you to summarize by the time that we get to 2 minutes 30 seconds, and then I will have to cut you off. Now, we do have, and I hope we can manage the technology of this, some maps so that people can determine where we are talking about. This requires us to switch from showing the webcast on the screen to showing the maps. This is technology we're not used to using, so you will bear with us, I hope, if we get the wrong pictures or the wrong site. I don't know whether you wish to speak on particular sites or a series of sites in Overton, but we have the other sites on there if you wish. So we will, if I can work this machine here, we will start now.
Okay, good evening. Overton's sewage system, I believe, is seriously challenged by the proposals. We are talking about the north of the centre of the village, close to St Mary's Church and the ORC. Foxdown Phase 2, we know, required additional capacity, and improvements were installed, actually retrospectively, post-development. Recently, but not for the first time, residents in the terrace of cottages facing the ORC and Kings Clear Road requested help from Southern Water. Reason: overflow of sewage into their properties. Young children live in these here. Now, the so-called remedy will be to install a pump alongside a key connecting drain in my garden. The power is to be provided by the nearest cottage. So, the proposed number of additional homes will give rise to additional surges of sewage, without doubt, that will be of a far greater order than can be managed by such trivial measures. Note, in our valley, water ingress is already noticeable within the sewage system, arising from a very high water table, as pointed out by Southern Water workmen to me. And the fall in the main sewage Victorian system is very shallow. Some local houses still capture rainwater in their gutters and channel it not into soakaways, but into the sewage system. This is a weakness in many areas, I know. The conclusion: I and others anticipate re-emergence of surface sewage close to my home. Proposed action: I will not delay in bringing samples of overflowing sewage to the council. So please, and I address this to Councillor Sherlock, no more sewage, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for being so succinct as well. Dr. Tom Riddler. There we go. That's it. Yes, Dr. Riddler. It's the long button in front of you there. You will have you have to press it, and the light should come on your microphone. Yeah, that's fine. And you have 2 minutes plus 30 seconds to summarise.
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Tom Riddler, Chairman of Overton Parish Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Overton is close to completing a community plan known as Overton Futures. Several things have emerged very clearly while collecting the evidence base. First, people want Overton to remain a village. Second, there is a need for a modest number of affordable dwellings for Overton people. And third, many issues related to traffic, including speed, parking and heavy goods vehicles. We also have a village design statement which emphasises that we wish to keep the iconic views of Overton and the medieval street plan, and it further illustrates that the village sits in a bowl on the River Test, surrounded by high ground. Your plans for housing are totally incompatible with these. Your proposals are for urban scale development. This is not NIMBYism. Overton has only just seen the completion of 2 large developments. These have already revealed the inadequacy of infrastructure. The C29, our connection to the M3A303, is narrow, dangerous and disintegrating. The B3400, gateway to Basingstoke, and of course shared with Whitchurch, is one of the most dangerous roads per mile of any in Hampshire. The sewage system, we've heard, is at capacity. And our much vaunted railway station is on the outskirts of the village, with a decrepit, unadopted approach road and an overflowing car park. The trains are close to capacity, and there are no foreseeable plans for either increased frequency or longer trains. Your first plan, with OV002 phased and in the later stages, might just have been manageable and allowed time for the integration of our two new developments into the community. But you have brought this forward.
You have 30 seconds.
You have added 004, which sits on the skyline, and to add insult to injury, OV007 as a strategic policy on high ground behind the church, a location explicitly ruled out in our village design statement. Your current proposals, therefore, have been found totally unacceptable by Overton Parish Council, and I ask you to rethink them.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Mrs. Baker. Good evening. I think you know the score.
Yes, I see the microphone is on. Thank you, thank you. Cabinet, I've been inundated with phone calls and emails since the bombshell of 305 more houses, including site 007, the land immediately behind the church and burial ground, was dropped on Overton. People have talked to me about their fear of losing the character of the village, which was always a working village, and instead becoming just another dormitory. After all, we no longer have the same high level of local employment we once had, nor are there any plans to replace it. People speak of the creaking infrastructure of the village already at breaking point, as you've heard. Improvements promised to cope with the last two housing developments did not materialise. We were promised parking at the station, a footpath to the school, and improvements to the sewers. We did not get them, and DC Committee had no choice but to allow occupancy of extra houses at Foxdown before the sewer work was done. We can have no confidence whatsoever that any infrastructure improvements promised this time will happen. The portfolio holder's report argues that Overton has had below average development recently, with no evidence to justify the statement. I believe, in fact, that average is meaningless in this context, as it's so distorted by the major developments that have taken place around the north of Basingstoke. If instead, for example, you looked at the average number of new houses for each village in the borough, you'd get a very different answer and find we have more than had our fair share already. And if you calculated an average share of the housing needed in the next 15 years in the borough, you find that this proposal before us tonight has increased Overton's fair share by a massive 50%. Looking at site 004,
30 seconds.
at Two-Gate Lane, the access would mean straight lights and hard urban character right on the top of Overton Hill. And 007 will destroy the setting of the church, which is the iconic view of Overton, as on the front cover of the borough's conservation area appraisal, would take away the chance of expanding the burial ground and could well impact on archaeological remains of the original pre-13th century village. Even more frighteningly, the Schlar describes the site as having capacity, even at low density, of 80 houses, giving me no confidence we'd only get 35. So please, Cabinet, remove 007 and 004, move 002 back later in the plan period, and give Overton a chance to catch its breath. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tilbury, and then I was intending to call Rex Roberts. Okay, just to give you advance warning. Good evening, Councillor Tilbury. Yeah, I am sticking exactly to the time, and I know how you like to be tightly timed.
Thank you, Leader, yes. Yes, given the limited time to speak, I won't go into great detail over the numerous issues I have previously raised regarding the problems we have in Overton through the Schlar process and through, on the 3 nights I sat through the planned infrastructure where we looked at all this. The infrastructure of what is basically a medieval village located on a poor B road, stuck with a 1930s sewage system and limited capacity at the school and surgery, or the fact that both larger sites are nearly 50% larger than any development previously built in this village, which will increase the size of Overton by around 20% in one go. What is most appalling is the total lack of communication with the residents of Overton, who only found out this cabinet had added an additional site for 35 or possibly 80 houses in the plan in the last few days. This was done without even having the decency to advise either myself or Councillor Baker. We only found out about it from the revised decision notice placed on the website last week. The fact that another site for 150 on top of the previous 120 had been included prior to the January Oscom meeting had barely been communicated to Overton residents until last week due to the timetable in the parish newsletter, out of date before it was even delivered. It has been left to myself and Councillor Baker to make residents aware of these three sites at our own expense, and you see the result of that tonight. This council has done absolutely nothing to notify Overton residents that it intends to increase the size of their village by 305 houses. This is a disgrace. The argument that building in Overton is acceptable as it will not lead to coalescence with other settlements, whereas building on the rural fringes of Basingstoke will, goes to the heart of the issue that I've raised on this council for many years. When will Basingstoke be big enough? Clearly the answer is it has reached the limits of practical expansion unless we sacrifice Bramley, Dummer, Oakley, Old Basing, Sherburn St John, Overton of course in a way, and over every other village threatened. As a short-term fix, the Cabinet now intend to use Overton and Whitchurch as satellites to meet housing need in Basingstoke. This is totally unacceptable. Basingstoke chose to become an expanded town back in the 1960s.
30 seconds.
Overton, Whitchurch and the other villages threatened did not. If Basingstoke wishes to continue to grow, it needs to solve its own problems. The villages of this borough have suffered enough. But what is driving this relentless growth for more housing? In Eric Pickle's announcement on the scrapping of the South East Plan, it states, the government made clear its commitment to return decision-making on housing and planning to local councils and to end the era of centrally imposed targets. That was last week. Yet here we are being told we have to accept a top-down housing number from our own Borough Council Cabinet, who now appear to be blaming their own government, or at least their government's planning inspectors, for the increase in housing numbers. Clearly they can't both be right.
Thank you very much. Mr. Roberts, and then I have Mrs. Alison Cross afterwards. Yes, if you'd like to press the long button on your microphone, that turns it on.
Okay.
And you have 2 minutes plus 30 seconds to summarise.
Okay, thank you. In view of the 2 minutes that we have, I'll restrict myself just to a few headings and a few points, if I may. First of all, what am I for? I'm for building houses. 1.1. 1.2, I'm for building houses that meet the local need for affordable housing in the first instance and severely limiting numbers thereafter. 2, what am I against? I'm against the development on the proposed site at Twoggate Lane and Waltham Road, OV004, 150 houses. 2.2, I'm against development on the proposed sites at Court Farm, OV007, 35 houses. 2.3, I'm against the number of houses proposed for the extension of Overton Hill, OV002, 120 houses. And 2.4, I'm against opening the floodgates for further so-called logical development based on the disputed premises of these proposed developments mentioned before. Point 3, what do I want you to do? I want you to delete OV007, 3.1, 3.2, delete OV004, and 3.3, reduce the number of houses and the area of development at OV002. Why do I say this? Section 4, 4.1, planning should be coherent and not piecemeal or opportunistic. 4.2, planning should be constructive and not destructive. 4.3, these proposals, 4.3.1, sever any real connection with meeting local need. Point 2, show no sensitivity to the local built and natural environment. 3.3, and most importantly, threatens to destroy a distinctive way of life. 4.4, the proposed development is on an urban scale and will do irreparable harm to the character of the village, the environment it occupies, and the life that goes on there. 4.5. These proposals treat Overton as nothing more than a suburb of Basingstoke.
30 seconds.
4.6. Such development would turn the village into a dormitory, housing people who must work elsewhere. 4.7. It would destroy the historical and living connection between the fields, the factory, the workshops, the local trade, shops and services, and the people who live and even now work in the village or nearby. So, what do I say in conclusion? Delete OV007, delete OV004, reduce the number of houses and area of development at OV002. Why? Because Basingstoke needs a village like Overton as much as Overton needs a town like Basingstoke. The sin would be
Time.
to destroy the distinction between them.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Good evening. I speak as a lifelong resident of Overton. In my lifetime, the number of houses in the village has more than doubled. Overton has grown considerably, yet it remains a great place to live and is still very much a village despite its size. In 2002, I was very proud to have been involved in the production of the Overton Village Design Statement. The VDS represented a huge amount of work and was a tremendous example of big society at work long before that phrase was coined by the current government. The VDS is not anti-development. Had it been so, it would not have been adopted by the Council as supplementary planning guidance. But it reflected our growing concern, and continues to do so, that so much of what we value about Overton and the quality of life enjoyed by its residents was under threat. The VDS established guidelines that would help manage change in a positive manner. Numerous references to the landscape setting, to protecting our cherished views. It makes it clear that any highway works associated with new development should reflect the character of the area, that new developments should aim to complement the predominant scale and style of nearby properties. It expresses a strong preference for smaller dwellings, 1 to 3 bedrooms, and affordable housing to meet local need. To our dismay, these guidelines have been largely ignored by the recent Overton Hill development. The houses are not in keeping with the area. It has destroyed a cherished view both into and out of the village. The highway works are what you could expect in an urban setting and not a rural one. And it's made a permanent negative impact upon the local landscape. OV 002, 004 and 007 will fly even further in the face of VDS guidelines.
30 seconds, please.
At the beginning of this century, we were asked by government to set out what we wanted for the future of our village. The community responded. We made our voice heard. Please don't ignore us now.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Lawan is next, and then Neville Crumplin. Good evening.
Hello, I'm Michelle Vaughan. I was born and bred in Basingstoke, and I've just watched how Basingstoke was made into such a mess and spoiled, and it's ongoing. And that's one thing I would hate to see happen to Overton. Also, what worries me is the surgery. At the moment, they can cope, but any more housing, and we're going to have to be ill the time that we book the appointment in a week's time, not when we're ill. And also, we have got a very close-knit community that is very well gelled together. With all this extra building, we were told a certain amount of houses, and suddenly the amount grows, and nobody seems to be any bothered, especially when part of our park was pinched for somebody else's house, and there's still an ongoing argument on that one with the builder. So how can we trust that any of those housing sites would be the amount that we were told and not grow to a disproportionate amount that we couldn't cope in the village. I've also got a disabled son, and we have a disabled car parking space down the village, but sometimes me and a couple of other people I know, when it's raining, have wanted to go down the village and park up to go shopping, but have driven round the village twice, couldn't park, and have had to go shopping outside the village. And this to me is also against that we're supposed to be environmentally friendly and not using our vehicles so much. And a lot of people are trying to do the good thing by going shopping in the village. But if you've got nowhere to go to park, then it's a very real problem. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much indeed. So, Neville Crumplin, please.
It's already been said what
Okay, fine. Colin Fellows, or I think it may be Fellows rather than Follows. I'm not sure. Fowles, is it? I apologise. Shoot, typist, I think is the answer. Mr. Fowles. Then you have 2 minutes, beginning now.
Councillors, good evening. I'm concerned by the proposed increase in development in Overton in the current iteration of the local plan. Why does Overton need to see an increase of 300 houses? Why does this number have to be foisted on us when other areas within the borough appear to be escaping responsibility? This will increase properties in the parish by 20% compared with the 2011 census. For a village of Overton's size, this is unacceptable, even over a 10 to 15-year period. Looking at the numbers of people based on average residential density from the 2011 census, 300 houses will bring a minimum of 1,100 persons to the village. This will increase in excess of the 20% in the population. Again, unacceptable. Can the village cope? What consideration has been given to the provision of local facilities? The primary school has a catchment area that is extensive and is currently taking overflow from Oakley. What provision is there for the school to be developed and extended, or will this be an afterthought? How will the growth in Overton, along with that proposed within Whitchurch, impact on secondary school provision? What consideration has been given? Of the current population of 5,000 people, 20% are of school age. With schooling at or above subscription level, how will any increase be absorbed? From both 2001 and 2011 censuses, the proportion of school-age children has not changed, so in reality we'll see an increase that our school cannot cope with. As you have heard, the village also already encounters problems with a sewage system and treatment plant at or above capacity. Overton is in a rural setting. We have limited employment opportunities to support significant levels of population growth, so become more of a dormitory. This will increase pollution and hit already stretched sustainable transport services, which are no better than average. The station is nearly a mile from most of the village with no bus service to it, limited parking and incredibly limited cycle storage. Train services are limited outside of commuter hours. Aside from Basingstoke and Andover, buses do not provide regular, straightforward access to other towns in the area. As for roads, the network will not take significant growth. The C29 to Mitchell-Dever and the A303 is narrow and decaying. Some roads in the village are unadopted and becoming a danger to public safety.
30 seconds.
The B3400 is not built for any massive increase in traffic, and one of the sites proposed leads directly onto this road, which will be exceedingly hazardous for all. With development of Court Farm, what consideration has been given to the aesthetics of this? How will this impact on the sanctity of the church, which will lose its focal position? In short, I appreciate development needs to be considered for all areas of the borough, but it needs to take place in all areas to spread the load. For Overton, that means restricting notable development in the next 15 years to Overton Hill and not burdening a community that cannot easily absorb growth beyond that. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Next I have Mr. Pearce, Harold Pearce. Yeah, if you'd like to come forward. And following Mr. Pearce, Mrs. Stevens. Good. Well, yeah, we could do. See how we go. It may not be.
Good evening.
Good evening. Mr. Pearce, you have
Large button here? Oh, we're there.
the large button you're on, and you have 2 minutes from now.
Okay, my name is Roy Pearce. I live in Winchester Street and Overton. I have 3 comments to make. I've spoken to a large number of people in Overton over the last few weeks and months, and the majority have informed me that they are very happy to keep the village size as it is now. Most have made Most have made the following comments. Traffic. Now, I know this has been spoken of before, but there was a couple of points that haven't come up yet. Congestion on all roads around the village is now at an all-time high, i.e. the 3400 main road is already very busy with traffic, especially with 40-ton heavy lorry and vehicles delivering to companies like De La Rue and the Schecht Organic Farm. And to our amazement, reading the local test magazine, which has just been issued, Bombay Sapphire will have 30 vehicle movements per hour, adding enormously to the traffic congestion. Now, I think this 30 an hour is the wrong. I think it should probably be 3 an hour, but that's still 36 movements a day. Now, you can imagine 36 movements a day, they've got to go either through Whitchurch or Overton. So that's a bit of a disaster. The only other route to the village is the C29 off 303, which is substandard and dangerous for the traffic travelling in and out of the village. So this road should be brought up to B-class standard before even thinking of enlarging our village to a small town. Car parking in the village is at saturation point with no plans to increase capacity before any additional housing is planned. Lastly, no plans have been mentioned to build a small amount of 1 or 2 bedroom retirement homes for local residents so they can downsize and other people in the village can move into their properties. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Next we have Mrs. Stevens, and then following that, Brenda Payne. Brenda Payne, is she here? No. In that case, Miss Jean Scrivener, are you here? And would you like to come down to the front now, so we can get one lot of? I think you could join them, gentlemen of the press, probably. It would be a very good thing, but at least saves having to have too many movements. And after Miss Scrivener, Mr. Mackenzie from the Overton Village Design Group's statement steering group. Yeah. Right. Okay. You're okay over there. Do come and sit down on the chair. Save standing for a couple of minutes. Right. Let me. Right.
Shall I switch myself on?
You're already on.
I'm already.
So
Okay.
don't.
Right,
wait.
I'm Belda Stevens, I'm chair of the Overton Society. The Overton Society has adopted the role of custodian of the Overton Village Design Statement, which was formally adopted by this council in February 2002 as supplementary planning guidance. Now, the Overton Society hosted a survey in the winter of 2010-11 of the importance of the VDS guidelines in supporting Overton Vision 2020. All the guidelines in the document were endorsed as important, so the VDS is still very much a current document. The VDS landscape and environmental guidelines have been ignored by the recent amendment to include site OV007, which was not in the original report. We do not understand the rationale for this, and the identified issues with landscape and heritage in the report still exist. In conjunction with other issues with this site north of Court Farm, I draw 2 VDS guidelines to the attention of Cabinet. New development should respect the river valley setting of the village and its significant buildings and natural features. Views into and out of the village, such as views of St Mary's Church from Overton Hill, Kingsclear Road and Winchester Street, must be safeguarded. Both of these guidelines were identified as particularly important in the survey in winter 2010-11. Hence, we request that the late edition of OV007, which is contrary to the VDS guidelines, be reversed. And also that all future development in Overton
You have 30 seconds.
takes full account of our VDS statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Jean Scrivener. I've lived in Overton for 37 years and I live in a tiny little lane in the centre of the village. So the village centre means a lot to me. The traffic is extremely bad through the village. Can't get two buses past each other because of lorries that parked in the shops. The cooperative shop this is the only shop we have in the village that has the basic ingredients for running the home. Already people that enter the shop who are not local people are complaining about the queues at the tills and the lack of the goods they need on the shelves. The store relies on its deliveries. It doesn't come daily, so fresh fruit and vegetables, bread, milk, things are just not available at times. And people who don't understand this are getting rather fatty and bad-tempered in the shop. Also, the chemist in the shop. It's a little village chemist. It can't cope with all the people coming with their prescriptions from the overcrowded doctor's surgery, expecting to get service straight away and rush off home with the medication. Sometimes it's just not possible. And again, I've heard rather rude language and bad moods from people who cannot get what they want immediately. So Overton is a beautiful little village. There's a great heart there from the older generations that have lived there for years. They're the ones that organise the clubs, the entertainment, the sporting facilities. It's a great-hearted community in that village, and I can understand people want to join in, but the village centre just seems to be being squeezed and squeezed. The expanding areas of not very attractive homes are crushing the centre heart of the village, and it just seems a shame that this should go on and on and on each year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mackenzie. It's on already, so you were okay.
Okay.
Right,
Good evening.
You have 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Good evening.
My name is Ken Mackenzie, and I acted as the chair of Overton Village Design's steering group, which published a village design statement in 2002. I'd like to speak particularly about site OV007, but the comments I make are true, I think, generally of the other two sites as well. OV007 is the proposed site behind Court Farm and adjacent to St Mary's Church. This site forms an important background to Overton Conservation Area and is visible from a number of locations from within the village. The site is sited on rising land, and there are parts of the site that are highly visible. I'd like to bring your attention to specific guidelines which are in the Overton VDS. I'd particularly like to bring your attention to page 13, Landscape and Environmental Guidelines. Two guidelines there. Developers must aim to maintain or improve the landscape characteristics of the village, and in particular respect the landscape setting of buildings within the conservation area, such as St Mary's Church. Also, views into or out of the village, such as views of St Mary's Church from Overton Hill, Kingsclere Road and Winchester Street, must be safeguarded. Page 19, Open Spaces Guidelines. The open spaces around Court Farm, the old rectory and Great North Field, are particularly cherished for their scenic quality, and any development must respect this. Page 23, Built Environment Guidelines. Development should be avoided where impact on the skyline would detract from views within the village. New development should not dominate the landscape and should be designed to maintain or enhance existing views, e.g. from Overton Hill looking across to St Mary's Church. I would also add to that a more general comment, page 6, Community Guidelines, which says that suitable time intervals should be allocated.
You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. Between the completion of one development and the start of another to allow the integration of new parishioners into the community. For these reasons, we feel that this development of this site would have a particularly negative impact and that this site should be withdrawn from consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mackenzie. I now have Jeff Smith, but he might decide not to on the night, it says here. Clearly he has. Either Mr. Well, after you is going to be either, or possibly both, of Mr. and Mrs. Dines, but you only get 2 minutes between you. So if you want to sort out how you're going to do that.
So, to start?
Right, Mr. Smith, yes, you
Right,
have,
can you hear me? Yes, right. Well, a number of things that have been said already, I don't need to repeat. I understand the challenge of balancing priorities when you have such a challenging plan. Points I wanted to make is Overton's a village. People choose to stay living in Overton because it's a village. People like me, who I'm a relative newcomer, only lived in the village 13 years, come because it's a village. I'm here right now because I'm quite staggered by the proposals that I've seen, because they clearly undermine the very nature of Overton as a village. If you live in a town, you expect some bustle, you expect to look out on a townscape. If you live in a village, you expect a slightly more rural environment. And my view is the village is at a tipping point. The traffic alone will be an example of that, but other people have covered this already. And I think these proposals go to the very nature, to undermine the very nature of the place that that is Overton. I'd add one further point. There's only one point in the village where the fields actually come right down into the village and meet the village and really define the place as a village, and that is the large field of which OVR 007 is the last piece of. And I think it would be quite an outrageous denial of the very nature of Overton village if a proposal like that, not to mention others that I know are not currently being proposed, like the OVR 003, were ever, countenanced. I'm quite surprised actually that they're even being considered. That one in particular is even being considered, because it so obviously hits the very nature of the village. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Mr. or Mrs. Dines? Sorry, oh, they have. Thank you. Then Jean Parsons? If no. Dr. Kergellen? Good evening.
Good evening. I would like to oppose the proposed development in Overton. The proposed 305 houses are a gross over-allocation of houses to Overton, in my view. Although the population represents 2.6% of the total population in the borough, the proposed allocation makes up 3.5% of the total number of houses N4. This is 1.5 times what a fair distribution would call for. There is no capacity in the village to absorb such rate of growth. The existing infrastructure cannot accommodate the proposed development, and I argue that it will not be possible to improve it to the level required. Due to the time constraints here, I will only focus on one piece of infrastructure, and that's the railway station. There are limited job opportunities in the village, therefore we all know that the new population will have to commute. The station is highlighted in the documents provided by the Cabinet as the means to do that, or one of the means to do that. However, I contest this, as the trains are already running at capacity now, often with only standing room. I took the train this morning. The 19 minutes past 8 train was standing room only at Overton, and probably already was in Whitchurch. So how will the new commuters get on these trains? In addition, there is no public highway access to the station. Access is via an unadopted road that is not properly surfaced, is unlit, and has no pavement. It is dangerous for pedestrians and cyclists and constitutes a serious pedestrian vehicle conflict. In addition, people who drive to the station, they are faced with a shortage of parking spaces, so that cars are parked everywhere at the moment. In fact, parking has recently been further reduced at the station by the erection of a new building over some existing parking spaces. So, in conclusion, since the local authorities have no means or power to improve the rail service, which is down to the train company, or access to the station, which is down to the landowners, this infrastructure cannot be improved in line with the needs generated, that would be generated by the proposed new houses. In my view, Overton is a village and is not a commuter hub. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next I have Dr. Trickett, And then following that, Dr. Waldron. Dr. Waldron? You are there. Right, that's fine. If you want to just sit on the end there, that'll speed things up a bit. Dr. Trickett, 2 minutes.
Okay. I oppose the excessive development of Overton because it is disproportionate to the size of the village and ultimately it is not sustainable. Without local jobs in the village, the houses will be bought by a high proportion of commuters. Most commuters will use their cars because the trains are already full and occasionally overcrowded. The buses are rural and slow services and only go to certain destinations. There isn't any other place which is insane walking or cycling distance of the village. We don't have high-speed internet, so it's completely unreasonable to expect any significant number of people to actually work from home. The main east-west road, the B3400, is unlit, twisty, has no pavements along most of its length. It has slow rural traffic, carrying some significantly large straw bales, for example. It's the third most dangerous road in the county, and is the reason why Hampshire County Council is applying speed restrictions along long sections of the road. The north-south roads from the village are B or C roads. They are designed for a similar low volume of traffic. The C29 leading to the south is particularly dangerous. The B3400, as it actually runs through the centre of the village, is probably going to be reduced to a single track with westbound priority because there is insufficient pavement physically in the centre of the village and the road is sufficiently narrow that vehicles have actually been striking properties within the centre of the village. Parking and congestion are a constant problem in the centre of the village and at the train station. There simply isn't any more space to put cars within the village. Both the developments will all add to the school run. The school run is already considered a nuisance within the village. Additional development to the west of the village, such as, for example, Andover, will also add additional commuters to the B3400 and the rail service. I do not believe that any mitigation proposed by the developers can possibly address the scale of these issues. For example, it is naive in the extreme to believe that a few metres of hard standing suggested by the Overton Hill development constitutes a cycle path, and this can have any meaningful effect on the traffic levels in the village. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Trickett. Dr. Wharton, good evening.
Do I press the button?
No, it's still on. You're fine. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Councillors, I want to show that the whole process has been flawed and is irrational. Report to Cabinet says that most of the housing need and nearly all the potential employment will be in Basingstoke. It then sets out 3 options. 1. Concentrate development in Basingstoke. 2. Include the larger settlements, such as Overton. 3. Include the smaller settlements as well. Option 3 was rejected on 2 grounds: that it would adversely affect their rural character. Secondly, that people would have to commute to Basingstoke by car. So you went for option 2. Overton is an historic village, but evidently this didn't matter when it does matter in Steventon and Waltham. Loss of our historic character is exactly what we fear. You also said that people in Overton would get to Basingstoke by public transport. You've already heard the difficulties of that, and we believe they will in fact go by car. So what was wrong with option 1 if all the jobs are in Basingstoke? First answer given: it is unlikely to provide a range of sites to enable choice. But housing need and choice are not the same thing. Why do yet more damage to Overton just because incomers would like to come and live here? Second answer was because it is not equitable for Basingstoke to take all the development. But option 2 is not equitable either. Overton takes a 15.9% increase, Basingstoke only 8.9%, and the smaller settlements nothing at all. The arguments in favour of option 2 are weak, and there are powerful arguments against it. We find the Council's proposals illogical, arbitrary, and irrational, a phrase you may have heard before somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Alison Zarecki. Alison Zarecki? No? No. Okay, Edward Beckman. And following Mr. Beckman, David Hewitson Brown. Are you Mr. Hewitson Brown here? No? He is, but you don't wish to speak, or you do? Thank you very much. Then the last speaker on Overton will be Mr. Williams, I believe. Fine, thank you. Sorry, going back to Mr. Beckman. You have, well, you will have, as soon as I press this button, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. My comments relate to all areas in Hampshire and are probably relevant to everybody here. I've got one statement and one question. Firstly, I do a lot of work in Hampshire and Oxfordshire relating to grants to improve basic village services where they need support in smaller settlements, such as shops and halls and so on. The current planning policy is flawed. If you only develop towns or villages that have facilities, then you make it even more difficult for shops, buses, halls and schools, etc. to be viable in smaller settlements. This approach of making bigger and ignoring smaller areas deprives the countryside of variety, and it ends up with a country that's either cities or deserted outposts with no community or services at all, and loads of travel by car. I gather that some other enlightened councils have already realised this, and they're doing it differently. Secondly, and this is the part with the question, I know that the portfolio holder, Councillor Sherlock, declares 25% shares in Sherlock Properties Limited, which according to Companies House today was dormant. Yet their website lists 32 corporate clients, 10 of which are in high-end property development, and 10 are investment bank or funds. My question is whether this gives you a balanced view of planning needs and whether he should continue to vote on any planning issues. Thank you.
On the last point, I'm going to ask the Chief Executive to give us a clear statement of what constitutes an interest in this area.
Leader, this is the first I've heard of any reference to any interest, so I'm not in a position to comment definitively on it without actually looking further into the matter. At the end of the day, it is the responsibility of any member of the council to put onto the council's register of interest any relevant interests. And from what's been said, I would assume that we are dealing with a relevant interest. It is also then the ultimate responsibility of any elected member to declare during proceedings where they consider that their interest is affected, that interest, and if that interest falls within the definition of an interest where the members should exclude themselves from participation in the debate and the vote on the meeting, that is a matter for that elected member. I can't give definitive advice without knowing the details of the interest. Councillor Sherlock himself will know, obviously, whether or not he has any such interest, and will initially determine himself whether he feels that he is in a position where he would need to declare and withdraw. As I say, that hasn't previously come to my attention, and in the absence of that, I can't advise that Councillor Sherlock should leave the meeting because I don't have the information to give that advice.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Councillor Sherlock, so we can kill this problem once and for all. I dislike having personal issues being brought up at this stage. It could have been brought up a long while before if somebody believed there was a case, but we will try and kill it off now. Is there anything you wish to say?
I don't believe I've got any interest to declare at all. Thank you.
Then you've heard the ruling of the Chief Executive that it is up to Councillor Sherlock. He has made it very clear that he believes he has no interest to declare, so we shall continue with Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams, yeah, you press the button there. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. A lot of the points I was going to make have been covered, but I want to refer to a few of them because there are certain aspects which perhaps haven't been emphasised as much as they might have been. I do want to say that my purpose in being here is to speak against the inclusion of Site 007 and to ask you to review very carefully your proposals in relation to 004. The supplementary report refers to the averages of development in both Overton and Whitchurch in relation to what has happened in the past, and it seemed to me that that is a total irrelevance. If you could determine the local plan by looking at how much development there have been in certain places in the past, you just need a spreadsheet. In fact, it's obvious that consideration should be given to the nature and character of each area, and that is why several of the proposals in relation to Overton are considered unacceptable. There's also reference in the supplementary report to the station and to the village centre as reasons justifying further development. A lot's been said about the station. The station car park is used not only by people from Overton, but by people from other parts of the area, in Kingsclear, for example, for whom it may be the most convenient way of getting to London. And therefore, in addition to not being able to accommodate people from future housing in Overton, it will not be able to accommodate the people who may want to use the station as a result of continuing growth of rail usage from elsewhere. The village centre and the traffic problems have been mentioned. I doubt whether any examination of infrastructure can come up with a solution to those without a major impact and probably the destruction of the character of the village as it is at the moment. Finally, I shall mention the school. The school's recently
30 seconds.
Right, recently expanded from 1.5 forms of entry to 2, and 2 forms of entry is a sensible educational organisation. Expanding further involves mixed age classes which parents find very difficult, and so do teachers, and that will be necessary if there are further substantial number of homes with children of school age. So these are additional reasons why the proposals as put forward at the present stage should be reconsidered, and in the case of 007 rejected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams. That concludes all the speakers that I have listed who wish to speak on Overton. Fine. Would you like to come forward then, sir? I'm not sure where you disappeared to on my list. I apologise that you've clearly dropped off the bottom. Your name is?
Yes. Hello, I'm Peter Baker. Thank you very much for
Oh, sorry, I did call you earlier on, and we must have missed you along the way. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I won't go over and bore the committee endlessly with all the details, but a couple of things that haven't been brought up is the fact that the Laverstoke Mill, the Bombay Sapphire, they're expecting 100,000 people per year to visit that facility to taste a wonderful Bombay Sapphire gin, and a proportion of those will come through the middle of Overton. Now, the pinch point in the middle of Overton is actually half the width of this room. It's very close to the gun shop there, and the roofs of the gun shop and the house opposite are continuously being knocked by high-sided vehicles. And the other thing that hasn't brought up is the impact on the businesses. Now, I've had a shop in Overton for 13 years, and I'm very grateful for people coming in to tell me it's taken 20 minutes to park. I never thought I was going to get a car parking space. So I'm very pleased when they come in and tell me that, because what worries me, of course, is the people who haven't been able to park and have just driven out the village. Now, importantly, the points that other villages are brought up are vital. And the last thing I want to say is Overton is a rural village surrounded by green fields, and we do not think we should be a dormitory town for Basingstoke or further afield. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Right, I hope there is nobody else that I have overlooked on my list. If excuse me. Right, we will deal with that one in a minute. What I propose we do now is I shall ask Councillor Sherlock to respond on the comments made on Overton, and then I shall ask other Cabinet members to, thank you, if they wish to make any comments. And then we will summarise, obviously, at the very end. But Councillor Sherlock, do you wish to comment on Overton? I will deal with the other issue later.
First of all, I'd like to apologise to Councillors Baker and Tilbury that they were not given further advance warning of the change in the sites. I will look into that and see why it happened. Otherwise, in general, just summing up, the infrastructure at present is stretched. Sewage doesn't work properly. You are a village. You don't wish to become a town. There are traffic problems, and I know there are traffic problems, and I know there are parking problems because I go to Overton a lot myself. The trains, I haven't commuted for years, so I can't comment on the commuter trains in the morning, but when I do use them, they're not bad. But then I use them old age pensioners' time. That's really, I think, about what it is. There is one crumb of comfort I perhaps can give you, and that is that 007 is going to be reviewed. I went and had a look at it the other day, and I've discussed it with officers, and due to the landscape and the access, we are going to review it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sherlock. Other members, Councillor Golding.
As a councillor representing Oakley, and therefore probably the one nearest to Overton, I must say I thought the representatives of Overton made a number of very good points tonight. I think it was very important at the beginning that when Councillor Sherlock agreed to delete the word agreed from what we're doing, this is not an agreed list, it's a working list, so the more work continue. And I must say, on record, I thought that a lot of good points were made tonight and in the emails that were sent in advance. And I shall certainly, when we come to a decision point, be very sympathetic to the points that were made.
Councillor Rossington.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? I just want to say, as a villager myself down the road, I think that you've presented your case very well tonight. Certainly what you've said with regard to transport, school, your station, your doctor's surgery, businesses, parking and the train, I have every sympathy with it, and I think this is what's happening round the country with many villages, and we need to keep our villages safe. So certainly I think that tonight we are discussing transport and infrastructure, and I think that we should go forward and put forward to the government, to anybody who's going to listen to us, that basically we need to increase our infrastructure and to see that transport, education, health, etc. in our villages goes forward. So I will be certainly wanting, when infrastructure is looked at, to make certain that before anybody builds anywhere, we have this information. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. Any other members wish to say anything at this stage? I think there are 3 points which I would add. I think the significance of the village design statement is something which we do need to seriously take into account, and I think this is what should be done, particularly with reference to site 007, which I went and had a look at myself to make sure that I understood exactly what we were talking about and some of the points which were being made. I think some of the issues which were raised there, particularly the ones around roads, around sewage, schooling, etc., is precisely going to be the subject of the further work to be done. It is premature to start saying that this will not happen, this cannot happen. What I would draw everybody's attention to is the fact that there are two policies which have already been discussed in planning and infrastructure. There is, first of all, the overarching policy, which deals with the necessity for the provision of infrastructure alongside or in advance of any development before sites are released for development. And then there is a second draft policy which is attached to the Cabinet Papers here, which is site-specific, which in addition to the overarching requirements lays down specific requirements which have to be met within the area of that particular site. And obviously those can't be drawn up until you've done the work to identify where the problems are and what mitigation is necessary to require them. So there will be, and I think the first policy probably is in need of further revisiting, and we would certainly refer that back to planning and infrastructure to look at again. I don't think it's as tight as it might be, but then all the policies have to go back to planning and infrastructure for a final revision, so that will happen during the course of that. But I think it is that one can, to a certain extent, allay people's fears that if a site eventually gets on, whichever site, wherever it happens to be, gets onto the list of sites for future development, that it will just be allowed to develop regardless of whether the infrastructure happens. That kind of protection was not put in place during the last plan. It should have been put in place. Some of the national policies made it more difficult for it to be put in place. This time round it is easier and it will be put in place. And we need to ensure that happens. Right. We will come back to the overall consideration of the report at the end. What I'm proposing to do now is we're going to have a 2-minute break, because apart from anybody else, my back needs to stretch. And we'll come back and we will then move on to Whitchurch as the next subject of discussion, which will then be followed by BAS 107 and 122, Razors Farm and Cuffold Farm. So 2 minutes, we will start again at 10 to 8. Right, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time we began again, please. Well, it was for me, but it doesn't matter. Right, ladies and gentlemen, if you could be seated, please, then we can get on. Right, ladies and gentlemen, if you would be seated. Before we move on to the subject of Whitchurch, there is one other thing which I want to clear up. We were somewhat surprised by the assertion that Councillor Sherlock was busy building enormous properties all over the countryside. I think there may be some confusion here, because I think the company which was referred to was Sherlock Properties. Councillor Sherlock has absolutely nothing to do with Sherlock Properties. He has never been a director of Sherlock Properties. He does have a share in a company called Sherlock Parties, which is his wife's catering company, and does very good parties, I'm assured. But I don't think that parties and property have a great deal of similarity. So I think we can... Sorry? And they have, may well have clients, but I mean, they are having clients for catering. Yes. Fine. Well, I think you made your point, but I just wanted to make it clear that Councillor Sherlock has nothing to do with property companies or property development in any way. He is a minority shareholder in his wife's catering firm. Right, we shall now move on to Whitchurch, and the first speaker I would like to call is Councillor John Clark from Whitchurch Town Council. And I shall then be asking Councillor Watts to come forward. So wherever you are, Councillor Watts, there you are. Mr. Clark, you've, I think, probably seen the way of doing these things. So you have 2 minutes from now.
Thank you. I have been mandated by Whitchurch Town Council to convey serious concerns raised by the last-minute arbitrary and peremptory changes proposed by the inclusion of sites WIT 010A and WIT 018 on the strategic allocation of sites for future housing before you this evening. Whitchurch Town Council has cooperated fully with the extensive due process for preparing this report and wish to record both our disagreement with the last-minute changes and the manner in which they have been proposed. Others will speak out this evening on the inappropriate and unjustified increase in housing units, which are not related to local need. Of particular concern to the Town Council is the requirement identified by Councillor Sherlock for infrastructure improvements through strategic reconfiguration, which are required as the proposed sites do not currently have adequate or safe access. Our concerns are: 1. Infrastructure changes and location are unknown, but could have significant impact on the character of the town, much of which is designated as a conservation area. In addition, we are unaware of any consideration of the need to enhance and possibly construct additional social facilities to accommodate the increased population, which is likely to be conservatively 2,000. 2. No officer involvement or local consultation in developing a master plan to understand the viability, impact and mitigation required to implement the required structural changes. Scale and cost of infrastructure improvements unknown, putting the commercial viability of the developments and delivery of 160 affordable housing units, questionably 40%, in question. 4. Recent 100% increase in housing units for each site results in a density greater than other recent developments in Whitchurch and would result in far fewer family housing units in a more urban development. In conclusion, I would request on behalf of Whitchurch Town Council that consideration be deferred to allow time for the appropriate consideration of the concerns raised. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Leader.
2 minutes.
Councillor Sherlock has said that these are merely suggestions, but I think every borough council here knows that this is a stage in a process which, albeit slowly, is moving inexorably towards a local plan. And we now have a tight timetable because of our dilatory approach in the past. So saying these are just suggestions is sort of minimising what's happening here. This is what is going to go into a draft local plan for consultation. Like the Overton councillors, I found out about this change a week ago, and having engaged since the summer of 2008 with this process and attended many meetings, I now find that here I am with 2.5 minutes to present the case against 550 homes being assigned to strategic sites in Whitchurch. So I'll talk in bullet points. Well, I think you know, Chairman, I don't believe in personalising politics, and so when I say you, I mean all of you. There's no local justification for planning 550 new homes in Whitchurch over 15 years. This is top-down planning, which I understood this administration had set itself against from its beginnings. Whitchurch is the only settlement in the borough that's assessed local need and agreed a bottom-up proposal for numbers of new housing. The figure of 350 was derived from zero net migration plus an allowance to reduce the number of households in housing needs in bounds 1 to 4. Councillor Golding might remember when he was the Cabinet member receiving a letter from the Mayor of Whitchurch Town Council agreeing with the proposals, which were those proposals which were still in the plan until a week ago. Applying a different method, the planning policy officers calculated a figure of 345, which is as near as 350 as we can expect. Increasing the number of homes for Whitchurch from 350 to 550 has not been mentioned at any meeting, at any stage in the whole of this 4.5-year process. If these are strategic sites, there must be a strategy underpinning them, but that strategy hasn't been mentioned, let alone scrutinised at any committee of the council. The previously agreed approach was that 200 houses out of the 350 would be on sites to be chosen by local people through the neighbourhood planning process. Now you reject the neighbourhood planning in the supplementary report, but that's irrelevant because you're proposing to allocate all the Category 1 sites in Whitchurch as strategic. I could answer your doubts about neighbourhood planning if you'd like to ask me a question. Now, if the Council's strategy is now to base strategic allocations on historical growth, I look forward to its application across the whole of the borough, not just to Whitchurch and Overton. And in the case of Whitchurch, the past 10 years is an unhelpful sample because there have been virtually no completions of houses in the past 3 years, and of course that's partly due to the dilatory approach of the Council. Now, we're not going to stand by while you destroy our community. I believe that this decision to reduce the number of houses in Bramley by 200 and increase the numbers in Whitchurch is blatantly party political move. And I would ask you to reconsider this, to go forward with the plan that everyone has agreed with. And it hasn't been easy to agree because, of course, there's some people who don't want any houses at all.
Time. Thank you. Next we have Maureen Cady, and then following her will be Virginia Phillips. If you'd like to press the long bar on the thing in front of you. Yeah, yes, the long bar on the console. That's it.
Okay.
That's
Thank
fine.
you.
And
Good
you
evening.
have 2 minutes.
Good evening. Whitchurch is struggling now with their surgery in schools, with some children already going to school some 12 miles away in Winchester. How are you planning for Whitchurch to cope with 350 new homes, let alone 550? Also, how can you justify the fact that you are taking away our green fields, hedgerows and wildlife? And the published presentation proposes the majority of development of 400 houses to be south of the river. The land required to do this will take development outside the local plan boundaries, thereby setting a precedent with regard to building on green belt, high-grade agricultural land, and allow urban sprawl. Whitchurch cannot cope with such urbanisation. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very brief point. Virginia Phillips? Virginia Phillips? No, Virginia Phillips. Pat Taylor.
Some photographs I've taken that points out the issue, yeah?
Pass them round. Thank you very much.
Very much.
Just to say that after Pat Taylor will be Mrs. Joanne Brooks, if you can ready yourself.
Is this on?
Right, the microphone is on and you have 2 minutes.
Right, this is planning for the east of the Nolins, that's WHIT 010A. I have concerns for the 200 houses planned for this area. Having lived on Mitcheldover Road for some 8 years and seen the increase in cars using this road and the surrounding roads, the amount of parking is now happening on the roadside around the Nolins, Alliston Way, Lower Mitcheldover Road, but worse, it's the parking along Winchester Street. That I thought was going to be stopped at one stage, but on a normal run outside school hours is bad enough, but from 8:15 to 9 o'clock, and the pictures are showing what it's like, and then again around 3 o'clock, it's near impossible to get out of the junction at Alliston Way and then onto Mitcheldover Road and onto Winchester Street. In hindsight, the council could have thought about compulsory buying the Harvest Home, which the land could have been used for residential car parking for those houses opposite the Mitcheldover Road and the cars that are parked along right up to the village hall. This would give a clear road and instead of the single line traffic that we have to come onto at the moment. If this proposal goes ahead, we can expect as many as 300 extra cars, as it's normally 1 to 2 cars per household. And the bottleneck already driving through from Whitchurch to Overton is almost impossible. Not forgetting that the council has already passed a small development between the school and the local shop on the corner. This adds to the problem, and the proposal of hundreds of extra houses on the Winchester Road, which is 350, is going to have a huge impact. As the community school opposite myself has functions on weekends, i.e. the potato weekend that brings hundreds of people, this also causes congestions. I read the proposal said that the road is going to be from Alliston Way onto Mitcheldover Road, and the problem will only start at that junction. I ask that no proposal for this area should be considered until the road parking around this area, and especially along Winchester Street, is resolved. Thank you.
Oops, thank you very much. Where have we got to? Mrs. Brooks. Good evening. You two have 2 minutes.
Okay. I live in Whitchurch and would like to make the Cabinet aware of a petition that has been signed by 262 people asking that they vote against the increase of the additional 200 homes in Whitchurch and reinstate the location of dwellings in the later phase of the plan to be decided through local determination, i.e. neighbourhood planning, and not take away our right to have a say in the future of our community. This does not necessarily mean that the people who signed this petition agree to the 350 homes, as this is still too many, all the sites proposed in the original document, and would still expect the right to voice an opinion on this or any other number of sites in the local plan that comes out for public consultation. I would also like to point out that this petition has only been running for just over 48 hours and has not involved knocking on doors or standing on streets, but has been put in 2 places in Whitchurch where people have had to take time out of their day and make a special journey to go and sign it. I firmly believe that if the revised decision notice had not been left till the last minute to be made public knowledge, and you had allowed more time for the people of Whitchurch to be made aware of these proposals, you would now be faced with a petition with over 1,000 names on it. Even based on the 262 signatures alone, if everyone who had signed that had asked to speak tonight, you would have had to listen to 8.5 hours to what they had to say. So I would ask that you take notice of these people and not allow this Cabinet's legacy to be the destruction of our beautiful town and the removal of good quality agricultural fields that have provided food crops to this country for over 100 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Julie Peters. Good evening. Yeah, the microphone is on and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Given that in line with current government policy, Whitchurch Town Council and the people of Whitchurch had come together to work on their neighbourhood plan, I would question why, in the revised decision notice, the location of dwellings in Whitchurch in the later phase being decided through local determination, i.e. neighbourhood plan, has been removed. On the government webpage for neighbourhood plan, it says that we want people to be able to influence decisions about new and modified buildings and facilities in their area, and people have the right to get involved in development decisions that affect them. If the Cabinet vote for the revised decision notice, how can they justify taking away the democratic right of the people of Whitchurch to have a say in the future of their town, and disregard a policy that has been put in place by the current Secretary of State for DCLG, and go against the commitment that was made in the coalition agreement to give people more power over development in their area? I wonder if the Cabinet is prepared to publicly state that their intention to refuse the people of Whitchurch the right to a neighbourhood plan. Also, I would be interested to know how much time the Cabinet Committee has spent in Whitchurch and what consideration they have given to the risks and impact that building 550 houses would have on the people who live there, the pollution that would be created from the increased number of vehicles, and the effect this would have on people's health, local sustainability, and the undoubted increase in demand on public services, such as access to schools, doctors and dentists without driving, and also the police, refuge collection, etc. Not to mention the permanent damage that they would be inflicted on the countryside. Would they be proud to be the people who destroyed the character of such a special town? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, that concludes everyone that I have on my list. I think there are some others. Your name is two more speakers? 3 more speakers. Ah, that's probably why you're not on here. Well, do come. Well, I think as you phoned earlier in the day, you should come first. Is there a third one somewhere? And what time did you phone during the course of the day? I'm afraid we can only accept those people who have already previously notified, otherwise we could be here for hours on end. Fine. I think we'll take those 3. If you'd like to. Could you give us your name first of all, please?
Phil Cooper.
Phil Cooper? Right, we will note that. Mr. Cooper, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to reiterate a point that was made by Councillor Watts. I got myself involved in what I thought was the local development plan process. He reminded me it was back in 2008 and went through many, many meetings. All of this seems to have come to naught. What is the point in doing that? How on earth are you going to get people involved in local decisions if at the very last minute, and I mean the last minute, a week ago, all of a sudden all the paperwork is turned upside down and what appears to be an arbitrary number of houses allocated to Whitchurch. That arbitrary number, 550 homes, according to my calculation, is an increase of 25%. That beats Overton, you only got 20%. You've heard We've got exactly the same problems. Surgery with no extra capacity. Primary school full. Secondary school full. I'm secretary of the local football club. We can't take on any more youth because there are no sports facilities for them. Half our youth teams have to go and play in local villages because we haven't got room for them. You mentioned improving infrastructure. Well, if the infrastructure elements are the roads, if you look at the 5 roads coming to the centre of Whitchurch on the map, all those are bounded by terraced houses, which have just a narrow pavement between them. Are we going to widen the roads in a conservation area? That means knocking down houses. Whitchurch at the moment, as you heard, the centre of Whitchurch is terrible for traffic. This is particularly bad when there are deliveries or things like refuse collection on a Friday morning. You can spend 15 to 20 minutes getting from one side of Whitchurch to the other, and that is about half a mile. Absolutely ridiculous, and you can't do anything about it, as I said, because the only way to do it is to widen the road, and you can't widen the road because the houses are at the sides of the road. So therefore, I'd also like to...
30 seconds.
Thank you. I'd also like to reiterate the point against the fact that this appears to be an imposition from the centre, a very close centre, on Whitchurch, and would urge that you listen to what the people say. Otherwise, as somebody hinted at earlier on, the council doesn't have a very good record, and wasting time and money on another High Court case would be a bit of a waste, I think.
Thank you very much. Next gentleman, who again, I don't have a note of your name. Perhaps you would introduce yourself.
Good evening. Is the microphone on?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, good evening. My name's Bruce Letherby. I live in Test Road in Whitchurch. I only found out about this evening, so I'm not entirely familiar with the past events. I'd just like to say
you have
that...
2 minutes anyway.
Yeah, I would like to say that I obviously oppose the extra 200 houses for development. The gentleman before me eloquently stated the issues we've got with the middle of the town. Whitchurch suffers tremendously now from traffic pressure, even as we speak. And there's off-street parking. Lots of people, including myself, park their cars on the street because it's terraced houses with no parking. Even this evening on the way to this meeting, as I was proceeding down Winchester Road, which is one of the roads that will be affected, a van mounted the pavement in order to get by, and that happens on an almost daily basis in Whitchurch. So that point I'd like to make quite clearly, because what I don't want to hear is what you hear sometimes in the news of, some kid, someone in a pram has been taken out by a lorry, car or anything. So the pressure on town centre traffic is immense now, and another 550 houses are simply going to make that situation worse. And you can't mitigate that with infrastructure change in the town centre. The other point I'd like to make, I have 2 young children, both attend a local primary school, which as said before, is full. Both of my children now are in mixed classes. That may or may not be a problem, but that they actually cannot fit. My younger daughter can't be fit in the classes for the first year of school, so therefore she's gone up to the second year because simply the classes are full. So you can mitigate by building a bigger school, you can mitigate by increasing the size of a doctor's surgery, but the only way you can mitigate Whitchurch Town Centre is literally dropping a bomb on it and starting all over again. So that is the point I'd like to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think we have one more speaker. 2 more. That will be the last speaker on Whitchurch, I think, that we'll be taking this evening. So we have 2 more speakers. First of all, your name, sir.
My name's Les Jordan. I live in the Knowlings in Whitchurch.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Jordan. You have 2 minutes.
I'm going to be very brief. I did have 2 minutes worth prepared, but I think we've all heard quite enough very eloquent speech, so I'll just make one quick point, and that's that I think there's a very real need to recognise and act on the very real difference between not in my backyard and please stop chucking that over the fence when you think no one's looking.
Thank you. Thank you.
Did register at 1 o'clock.
I'm sure you did, but I wasn't actually answering the phone, so I can't vouch for that. Could you give us your name, please?
Steve Klimpson. Okay.
Right, you have 2 minutes.
I'm against the increase in 350 to 500 houses. In fact, I'm against the 350. In fact, I'd like to see 150. But anyway, BDBC have increased the number of houses from 350 to 550 in Whitchurch. There are about 4,700 residents in Whitchurch. Using the national average house occupancy of 2.4 people, this is likely to mean a population increase of 1347, which is 28%. Will all towns across the borough be getting a 28% rise in population? I think not. If so, can you confirm that Basingstoke is building houses for 25,000 people within Basingstoke town before 2027? If not, why not? Because that is the proportion. I understand that all of the 200 increase will be built on Whit 018 to the east of Winchester Road. The development will breach the natural long established town boundary, and in fact the site was rejected in the Schlar version 6 211 update. Here's a quote: "A development of the site would extend the town unnecessarily into the open and attractive countryside, and the scale of development would be inappropriate for Whitchurch." So, can you tell me why this site was considered unsuitable for development less than 2 years ago and is now found to be suitable? Building on this site opens up the real possibility of a vast development of the adjacent Whit 017, comprising some 82 hectares, which would be space for up to 4,100 houses. It's the developer's dream. If built, you can say goodbye to the Whitchurch we all know and love. Finally, we have to ask ourselves
30 seconds.
What type of country we're trying to build. Is it a series of new towns with inadequate facilities, or is it a bit better to centralise development in areas which have those facilities already, like Basingstoke? And just why are we trying to urbanise the countryside? Bigger is not always better. Thank you.
That does conclude all the speakers on Whitchurch. Councillor Charlotte, do you wish to summarise at this point in time?
Thank you. First of all, to Councillor Watts, same apologies I made to Overton. You should have been told earlier than you were. Basically, the points brought up were its conservation area, the new sites, that is, agricultural land, the surgery and the schools are already full. The strategic growth should be the same over the whole borough and at the same rate. You had already agreed a bottom-up plan with the borough during the last 4 years, and the parking and the transport, just like Overton, is a big problem as well. I think those were the points that were raised. Thank you.
Members' comments? Councillor.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on what opening point made by Councillor Keith Watts, where he was very sceptical of the comment that this was merely suggestions, and he claimed this was a stage in the process that was moving inexorably to the local plan on a tight timetable. I can assure him that some at least of us have learnt from last time's experience, and that is not what is going to happen. We are determined to make sure that anything that goes forward from tonight's meeting results in work that produces valuable extra information that we need before making a final decision. There is absolutely no inevitability that this is the list that will even be put forward by Cabinet for inclusion in the local plan, and as the decision notice says, Cabinet are also invited to agree that the pre-submission local plan will be considered by Council prior to undertaking public consultation. So not only will Cabinet be looking very carefully at the further evidence that we expect to arise from the work following tonight's decision, the whole list will go before full Council before it goes out to public consultation. So there is nothing inexorable about this list ever making it into a draft local plan.
Thank you. Councillor Donnell.
Thank you, Leader. Several times in both the contributions from the Whitchurch residents and the Overton residents, the issue of distribution of housing numbers across the borough was brought up. Now, it's something we've spoken about at some length within Cabinet before, and obviously with the situation with Aldermaston affecting Tadley, one of our major population centres, and also the area of outstanding natural beauty in the north, we do have an issue that we have our second major population centre that we are not allowed to build any houses with. So I think it's appropriate to bring that up again at this point, and also to urge the portfolio holder to carry on doing everything he's doing with national government to see if we can get a solution to that and give Tadley what it wants, which is some housing.
Thank you very much. Any other members wish to add anything else? I think I'm going to reserve my comments for later on in the final roundup, in which case we will move on, and this is going to completely throw the organisation of the maps on the screen, but never mind, we'll solve that problem. To Razors Farm and Cufford Farm, and starting with Councillor Tomlin, to be followed by Councillor Miller. Councillor Tomlin, good evening. You have, as you know, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Right, good evening, Leader and members. I would ask the Cabinet to consider rejecting this decision notice presented for the following reasons. In the recent series of P&I committee meetings, members clearly heard public opinion, considered the proposed sites and drew conclusions that many of the sites in the draft were not deliverable. It was clear to the audience that the sites to the north-east of the town would result in a huge impact to existing residents over the lack of and the ability to achieve the infrastructure required. The quality of life for those residents would be greatly diminished with issues surrounding schooling, health and transport. Housing numbers, the justification presented is still not convincing. How is it last year we agreed on 594, sold this to the public, and now we're being asked to accept 770. There was a view at P&I that the houses proposed for Bramley at Razors and Cuffode Farms would place too great a pressure on local communities, as local schools, public transport opportunities, roads and community facilities would be lacking. The improvements that might be possible would occur at the end of the development rather than keeping pace with it. The supplementary report acknowledges that Bramley has had significantly more houses than average, so it is relieved of a further 200, which is welcomed, but Bramley still takes the extra 810 in the south. The BAS classifications of these sites is still nonsense. Will it be Bramley that suffers, or will it be Chinham? I suggest both. Chinham services will be overloaded, and Bramley's community will have issues with the north and south Bramley, splitting the parish. We are clearly not considering what we do to local communities. The current planning application for Razors Farm would appear to conflict with many borough planning policies. It has several significant objections already, and so with this knowledge, it concerns me as to why we are therefore supporting it as a deliverable site. Also, the DC committee rejected Kiln Farm. It's now at appeal, yet, whilst this is going on, we put it in the draft plan. Where is our continuity of approach? Building houses,
30 seconds.
Thank you. Building houses around the incinerator on Basingstoke 121 brings with it many issues which have been glossed over, which is of great concern, given that this council should adopt a precautionary principle. We shouldn't put houses underneath the airborne emission fallout zone. Members of P&I and many public speakers suggested the most obvious way forward would be to significantly increase the yield on the Manydown site within this planned period, and we see no positive reaction to this in the decision notice. So in conclusion, I would ask this Cabinet not to support the decision notice as it currently stands. Not enough solutions to site-specific issues have been found. We cannot ignore them, and we can't hope to solve them during the building phase. With this proposal, we will not achieve the future vision for Basingstoke.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin.
We could potentially ruin it. Thank you.
Councillor Miller. Good evening.
Good evening, Leader and Cabinet. Chinham Ward Council, I'm also a member of the Chinham Parish Council. It's relevant to a lot of the statements that I'm going to come across tonight. Councillor Tomlin, I will endorse everything that he said. I'm going to address similar issues but not repeat what he said. During the development of the Schlar and the recent P&I scrutiny process, members and public representation were continually raising issues of the shortfall in infrastructure. In the broadest context, questioning yields and other critical factors on most of the sites under consideration. However, we were repeatedly told that these would be investigated in detail during the local plan development and would then be addressed to determine the suitability of the sites for development. This begs the question of the sustainability appraisal applied to the selection of the sites in the first place, as the availability and affordability of the necessary infrastructure apparently will not be known until after these sites are set out in the draft core strategy for consultation. Without the establishment of the necessary infrastructure to make the selected sites and existing communities sustainable in every way, we will not satisfy the requirements of the MPPF to achieve our adopted vision for Basingstoke. In other words, without the necessary infrastructure secured or in place, these affected sites are not sustainable by any measure and should be excluded. Promises are not enough, and we set ourselves to fail. We've had enough promises in the past. We got evidence in our communities for this. We are under pressure. We are not, as we're constantly reminded, to define our local plan, but the plan has to be right for Basingstoke and Dean and all the existing communities within. Chinham has no room for any further development, as you know, but we've accepted 12 extra dwellings.
30
But
seconds.
all the proposed sites in the northeast of Basingstoke will directly impact our community. There's a vision, part of the vision states Basingstoke is open for business. We do not want to deliver housing without necessary infrastructure, as this will potentially drive business away from Chinham. 4 businesses will leave the Chinham Business Park if the infrastructure for Razors Farm is not included. That is a statement of fact. I ask the Cabinet to carefully consider what was put forward at the 3 P&I OSCON meetings and include in the decision notice that sites are where you have suggested, subject to additional scrutiny and confirmation of infrastructure provision.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I now have Jessica Tattersall in the other room. Good evening, welcome to this room. Oh, you've changed. Right. No, you have to. That's fine. So you are not who you seem to be, but you're speaking on her behalf.
Speaking on behalf of Jessica Tass.
Fine. Well, you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, and I'm here to voice my concerns about proposals to include Razors and Cuford Farm in the working list of suggested sites for development. These are BAS 107 and BAS 122, and nearly 800 homes are proposed. I have here a petition from nearly 400 residents, all opposing development of Razors Farm, and the majority of which state infrastructure issues. Many of us have spoken about these infrastructure issues at the January meeting of the Planning and Infrastructure Committee. There have also been over 350 objections to the planning application for development of Razors Farm. Amongst these objections, there is a strong objection from Air Products, who operate a 24-hour noisy business and bought the land on the basis that the land surrounding would only be used for business use and not residential. Your own officers state, it is the view of officers that development to the west and southwest of Basingstoke are preferable to larger scale development in the north and east. Hampshire County Council's highway assessment has already recommended that the application be refused for a number of points, including, and I quote, that it cannot be reconciled with the National Planning Policy Framework in that significant movements generated could not be accommodated adequately on the existing transport network. This would result in a severe impact on the road safety and operation of the local transport network, contrary to National Planning Policy Framework and Basingstoke and Dean Local Plan Policy E1. So my question is this: what am I missing? Clearly there are a number of very strong reasons as to why neither Razors nor Cuford Farm should be included in the plan.
I can see no good reason for their inclusion, so again I ask, what am I missing? Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, lovely. Thank you very much. I will pass this round and down to Julia. Next we have Nigel Pugsley. And you are, I believe, speaking on behalf of Air Products.
Good evening. As a representative of Air Products, an occupier directly adjoining Razors Farm to the southwest, I am here this evening to register my client's opposition to the inclusion of Razors Farm as a potential residential allocation in the emerging local plan. Air Products has been a resident of Chinham for over 25 years. The site was chosen for its relative isolation on the northern boundary of the town, well suited for the storage, distribution and cylinder filling of gases for medical and industrial use. The site is a busy one, at various times operating up to 4 shifts, 24 hours per day. Articulated lorries come and go from the depot frequently. A certain level of noise is an inevitable byproduct of an industrial operation of this nature. Accordingly, the notion that a large residential scheme would be compatible with such an adjoining land use is nonsensical on a number of fronts. Firstly, noise levels from Air Products depot will lead to an inevitable and most likely ongoing conflict with homeowners. It's my client's experience that sensitive land uses located adjacent to facilities of this type eventually lead to complaints from residents and the imposition of restrictions on operations. It would appear nonsensical of the Cabinet to support the creation of new homes at Razors Farm that would put at risk the economic and social benefits that the area derives from having Air Products situated where they are. Secondly, Air Products is concerned with the effect that the development would have on the local infrastructure, specifically the local highway network. The development will lead to increased traffic flows and congestion, adversely affecting the operational efficiency of the depot, and indeed Chinham Business Park as a viable regional business destination. It's considered that the assessment undertaken by officers as part of the SHLA fails to consider these significant issues. So in summary, the proposal has the potential to jeopardise Air Products' continued operation in Basingstoke. Air Products employs 70 people at the depot and supports an extensive supply chain of local companies. Furthermore, Air Products has long-standing links with the local community, particularly schools and colleges, where support is provided to science and engineering departments. To secure the continued economic and social benefits that Air Products brings to Basingstoke, I would urge members to reject the inclusion of Razors Farm as a residential allocation in the emerging local plan. Thank you.
Timing was spot on, thank you. Nick Bywater. Good evening, Mr. Bywater. You have 2 minutes.
Good evening.
There we go.
Stand Against Razors Farm, or SARF as we've already heard, is a group of 400 residents from Chinham and Bramley who are opposed to residential development of BAS 107. Many concerns have been expressed by our residents, the common theme of which has been the impact of further development on the local transport network, local schools and doctors' surgeries. Hardly surprising really, as these are the issues that affect residents on a daily basis. What is surprising, however, is the relative lack of focus on these issues within the site assessments. More worryingly, there has been no detailed impact assessment in relation to the existing infrastructure. From the perspective of local residents, this is possibly the most important factor to be considered, and yet this continues to be overlooked. SARF is concerned that the result is an unbalanced process of review. Too little attention is given to such sites as Manydown, where sensible master planning can deliver comprehensive infrastructure for up to 4,000 homes, and too much focus is placed on the sites around Chinham, where no such infrastructure improvements can be guaranteed. For example, site assessments for Razors Farm simply state that in terms of highways infrastructure, there will be some deterioration on the wider network due to additional flows. This is hardly informative. Fortunately, As we have already heard, the planning officers now have the benefit of a formal response to the Razors Farm planning application from Hampshire County Council, which clearly recommends a refusal because, amongst other things, the significant traffic movements generated could not be accommodated adequately on the existing transport network. For this reason alone, Razors Farm and Cuffold Farm can be quickly dismissed as Category 1 sites. The same is true of education and primary healthcare, much of which is stretched to capacity and none of which will adequately support the level of housing proposed for Razors Farm alone. Don't forget that Razors Farm has long been regarded as the natural extension to the existing business park. It offers huge potential for the development of a sensibly sized railway station which would support the council's environmental policies. Designation of Razors Farm for housing development will place a restriction on the future economic growth of the business park, the effect of which could be easily felt within the planned period. In conclusion, SARF believes that the Razors Farm and Cuffold Farm cannot be developed for housing in a sustainable manner and should be removed as Category 1 sites. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, exactly to time. Now that, according to my list, concludes those people who wish to speak on these sites. Good, we haven't got anybody else or anybody else in the other room. No. In which case, Councillor Sherlock, do you want to summarise?
Reference was made to the P&I meetings where they were charged with identifying 7,800 homes to be built from 2015 to 2029. They actually came up with one recommendation for 100 at Swing Swang Lane, out of interest. And a reference was also made to the previous LDF, Local Development Plan, for 590. That was never a proven figure, and it was probably unsustainable under the rules of the Planning Inspectorate. Mention was made about the MPPF not being adhered to because of the Hampshire County Council refusal. Transport, schools and surgeries again mentioned. Very importantly, 4 businesses at risk, and the general infrastructure is also under criticism. That's what I picked up from that.
Thank you very much. Members, do we wish to comment? No? I mean, I think, two points to make. One is we must not confuse this process which we are going through now, which is future site allocation at some stage between now and 2028, 2029, for development at some stage point during that period, and a specific planning application for development now. The two are very separate issues, and a number of the points which have been raised will of course need to be dealt with by any planning application to ensure that there is conformity. Therefore, I don't believe that there is actually a conflict between saying that at the moment, as things stand, you cannot support a certain number of houses because the infrastructure will not deal with it, and looking at the longer term infrastructure requirements and what one can do in the longer term in conjunction with a number of other sites being brought forward, so that the amount of money available to solve the problem becomes available to deal with issues on a much larger scale than just dealing with it on a site-by-site case. That is why it is very clear in the decision notice that one is looking not just at looking at specific site-specific analysis of transport implications, but looking at it on a borough-wide and a subdivision of the borough, an east, a west, a north, an area part of the borough, to look at what the wider implications of that transport assessment will be. So I think we just need to be very clear that we separate out what are issues that would need to be dealt with by a specific planning application and those that need to be dealt with within the allocation of sites for the local plan. I'll come back to summarising some other points on that later on. Okay, if we've now covered those sites, we shall now go to 3, 4. We're going to BAS 104 north of Popley Fields. Again, I have 4 speakers on this on this issue, beginning with Councillor Ms Washbourne. Good evening.
Good evening, members.
There we are. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Councillor Viv Washbourne, and I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of the residents of Popley East, who will be directly affected by the development of the proposed site, BAS 104 Kiln Farm. Rarely has a planning application attracted so much local resistance and condemnation. But anyone reading Appendix 3, Site Assessment and Sustainability Appraisal Conclusions, January 2013, could be forgiven for thinking that the planning application hearings heard by the Development Committee on the 4th of July and the 19th of September 2012, where both the outline and the detailed application were refused, never happened. So much for localism. Popley East residents feel betrayed and disenchanted with the local democratic planning process. Whilst most understand the need for affordable housing, all agree this should not be to the detriment of the rest of the local community. A community that has seen over 2,000 new units built in the last 10 years. Tonight, the Cabinet will decide whether Kiln Farm and other sites should be included in the local plan. With the David Wilson Homes appeal ongoing, the decisions members make regarding Kiln Farm will have a huge impact. Please listen to the local community and the unanimous concerns expressed by the Development Committee. If BAS 104 is added to the local plan, I fear we will be opening the floodgates to development on greenfield sites all over the borough. This development will exit onto already congested roads, potentially causing traffic chaos at peak times. No consideration has been given to pedestrians who will have to cross increasingly busier roads, making journeys to work, school and college more dangerous. As construction begins, residents in Jersey and Guernsey will suffer constant noise, mess, along with the loss of much-needed parking spaces. David Wilson Homes, it seems, cares little of the impact of this development will have on the quality of life on the existing residents of this area, let alone the loss of the green open space, wildlife...
Sorry, you're nearly out of time. I've
Family-
to give you a warning.
Okay. With Merton Rise still yet to be completed, it's time to give residents a break from the seemingly constant development and disruption forced upon them. Please listen to the local community. In 10 or 15 years' time, they may be ready for this conversation, but not now. In the last few years, they have already sacrificed too much.
Councillor Mrs Frankham. Good evening.
Right, good evening, Cabinet.
You have 2 minutes.
Right. I'm here as the County Councillor, Borough Councillor, editor of the community magazine Popley Matters, and as a resident of 42 years in Popley. At first, I'd like to say to Councillor Donnell, I think you've been a bit misinformed. On a social media site, you've said that the councillors in Popley and the Popley residents have said no to 1,500 houses and yes to 8,000 on Manidown. I'd like you to prove where there's been 1,500 houses that we've objected to, because we haven't. We have not objected. We are not objecting to Merton Rise because it's in the right place, it's the right time, it's much improved design on the previous one. We've worked with the developers have been out and spoken to us. So we're not unreasonable people. We've already taken 2,000 houses, it's already been said. So I just hope that after it's been through, as you've been said, through development control, P&I, they've all said no, I'd ask the Cabinet to actually join and not be left at odds with everyone else. After all, there are other sites, and I'm not just saying Manidown, there are other sites, and that have not yet been built on. Perhaps as a council we should start looking at those. And can I say that in our local magazine, I can show you many pages where we have welcomed the new neighbourhood that was Marnell Park and over in John Hunt. So we're not being unreasonable. This is the wrong time, in the wrong place, and completely the wrong way. Please listen.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Ed Davis. Good evening, Mr. Davis.
Hello, good evening. Thank you.
You have 2 minutes.
Perfect. I've sat here 4 times over the past 12 months defending this land. We've had David Wilson Homes asking to build on it, and I've been encouraged that every time we've sat here, we've had every single councillor stand by us and say it is not right for development. There are 18 reasons. I'm not going to go into those because of the time that we have. It's all well documented. The irony is that we're now going to appeal. David Wilson Homes are saying that they think they should have a right to build here. The irony is that your planning officers are now supporting us. So on one side, you've got the planning officers taking the residents of Sherburn St John's side that this is an inappropriate site to build and defending all reasons for rejecting that. On the other side, you're looking at developing that. It gives an awful message, and the appeal will be flaky if you start saying this is appropriate land to develop. Moving on. 6 years ago, when the initial Marnell Park development was built, there was a newt habitat there, a great crested newt habitat. I've learnt a lot about those, and have been quite interesting to sit next to recently. You're now looking at dropping a housing development on their new habitat. This habitat was moved to BAS 104 site. We have taken advice from Natural England. They have 3 very distinct tests that they do. 1, the consented operation must be for preserving public health or public safety or other imperative reasons of overriding public interest, including those of a social or economic nature and beneficial consequences of primary importance for the environment. You fail that. Number 2, there must be no satisfactory alternative. You fail that. Number 3, the action authorised will not be detrimental to the maintenance of the population of the species concerned at a favourable conservation status in their range. We have photographic evidence of litter, shopping trolleys. The sites that were built for tunnels and access have now been let run. The property owner, David Wilson Homes, are responsible for developing that. They've failed in that. I see that, thank you. This development fails all 3 of these rules and is therefore illegal. The Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust also state that any development is not legally compliant and is unsound. Their quote, we have letters that prove that. In addition, the Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Society have said this proposed development is illegal. Development on this site is wrong, immoral, illogical, unsupported, and did I mention illegal? I urge you to reject it for this reason. In the 9 seconds I have a look at the other 17. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Julian Crawley. Good evening, Mr. Crawley. Press the button.
Sorry.
That's it. That's
Good
fine.
evening. Yes. Good evening, yes, Julian Crawley. I'm speaking on behalf of SPIG, Sherburn St John Planning Integrity Group, and Sherburn St John Parish Council. It is truly amazing that after 3 meetings of the Basingstoke and Dean P&I Ofcom, officers have seen fit to take no notice of recommendations made by the committee. We are especially concerned about further development north of Basingstoke, and in particular BAS 104, which you heard is called north of Popley Fields, and a few other names. We would mention a few of the issues already raised. Lack of sustainability, economic, social or environmental. Lack of community facilities. Issues with the open rural setting of the site as recognised by the 2010 Landscape Survey. Issues with the intervisibility due to topography and the elevated level of the site. Please see those cross-sections I've already forwarded to you. Inadequacies of mitigation. The topography makes structure planting ineffective. Inadequacy of infrastructure, especially water management. Deficient management of wildlife and biodiversity, as you've just heard. Inadequate understanding of local wet woodlands. And an overwhelming adverse impact on the residents of Sherburn St John, Popley and Marnell Park. How many more issues are needed to show this is a totally inappropriate location? All but one of the P&I Ofcom members found against this site and recommended against development,
the chairman summarised by saying there is grave concern this site is being looked at in this process. Secondly, this site has already been democratically tested by Development Control Committee, who rejected the recent planning application 15 votes to nil, not once but twice. This planning application in fact generated the greatest number of objections from local residents to Basingstoke-on-Deane ever recorded. Furthermore, Basingstoke-on-Deane is currently preparing a robust defence, as you heard, of this rejection and appeal. It is somewhat perverse to approve the site for inclusion in the local plan at the same time. We ask Cabinet members to reject these recommendations in general and BAS 104 in particular, and demand they are referred back to the P&I Ofcom for further discussion and agreement of proper and considered recommendations by the officers. You have a responsibility to protect the interests of the residents and communities you represent, especially when elected councillors have unanimously agreed this is not appropriate land for development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, that concludes all the speakers I think we have on BAS 104. Yeah. Good. Councillor Sherlock, do you want to summarise before I ask other members for comments?
Right, I picked up issues with topography, landscape, newts, loss of parking, I can't read my own writing, mess left after by the builders, bad management by the David Wilson Homes. They've already taken 2,000 houses. Wrong time, wrong place, wrong way. And it is illegal. That's what I've got.
Okay, members, who wishes to comment on this? Anybody wish to comment? If not, the only point I will reiterate the same point. I think it is important we get this clear. We are not dealing here with a planning application. We are dealing with the allocation of a site to be brought forward at some stage between now and 2029. The planning application, which is being vigorously defended by our officers and was voted on by our committee, was rejected on a specific number of grounds. The evaluations which we are suggesting that this site is put forward for will deal with some of those grounds in terms of looking at how feasible it is or is not to mitigate them. It is not, on the other hand, going to say that it has a particular view on that planning application. And we must separate out planning applications which are for the immediate and for development in the short term between a strategic site allocation over the next 17 years. And I think that is very important that we get in our minds. Right, I'm going to cause another brief pause now for 5 minutes until 9 o'clock, when we will start on the next subject area, which will be BAS 114 Kennel Farm and 132 the Golf Club, and then moving on after that to Manydown. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to begin again, please. If somebody could find the rest of my cabinet, it would be very helpful. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to begin now. Right, we're going to move on now to BAS 114 and BAS 132, and I think we may then probably glide seamlessly into many down as well. So we'll begin, if we may, with Stafford Napier. We seem to have lost a cabinet member, I'm afraid. I will wait for him to arrive because I think I can see him coming through the door now. No, we have to wait because otherwise we're not a proper meeting. It's okay. Right. I think we're all sitting comfortably, so you may begin.
Right, okay. The selection, my name's Stafford Napier from South Western Action Group. The selection of the sites in the far southwestern corner of Basingstoke, actually they're in Dummer, carries serious risks, slightly different approach from the other speakers you've had. Firstly, development up and over the southwestern ridge will require major sewage pumping infrastructure. It cannot be allowed to go into the Test aquifer and therefore must be pumped over the ridge into the Loddon Valley. Although Thames Water has indicated that in principle this could work, the costs and the redundancy necessary could make the whole development unfeasible. Secondly, no one has yet received a definitive answer, and indeed no one has even talked to the Highways Agency on the limits that still more development even nearer to Junction 7 of the M3 in respect of the substandard weaving at Junction 8. It would be disastrous if in the middle of the process the agencies suddenly decide that the traffic generated from over 1,000 more houses immediately adjacent to Junction 7, let alone a Western Ring Road, would mean that the Junction 8 could not operate safely, which is what they stated in 1995 in respect of a much smaller development. Finally, in respect of the golf course, the members so far have only voted to explore the feasibility of development. Even the LDF team admit that, quote, overall the most significant constraint is the availability of the site. How can anyone be certain that a majority of the 700 members may not go cold on the whole idea when a potential developer tells them that their financial expectations are going to be significantly reduced because of the costs of building all that infrastructure, the roads, the sewage pumping works, the schools, the public transport contributions and so on? The whole southwestern project could simply fall apart as a result of any one of these risks. I would simply recommend that you should ask officers if they wish to include any of these sites, that they get firm commitments from Thames Water, the Highways Agency and the Golf Club. Without these commitments, the council could be left with a very large shortfall right in the middle of the LDF process.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Julian Jones. Good evening. Got to press the button, and you two have 2 minutes now.
Thank you. Julian Jones, Chairman, Darwen Parish Council.
The judgment of the judicial review on the original pre-submission core strategy was that it was clearly irrational and unlawful. Since the judgment, the borough have focused on making the procedures legal, but have not eliminated the irrational selection of sites, some of which, the ones I'm talking about tonight, are not sustainable. Dummer Golf Club, BDB 132, and Hounsome Fields, BDB 133, are furthest from the town's amenities and from major employment areas. The combination of Beggarwood that was built in the last plan period and the sites within Dummer, which is a settlement of just 187 dwellings, and outside the urban settlement policy boundary, the sites we've talked about, plus BDB 114, constitute a major development area which the public rejected in the consultation. These sites are beyond the ridgeline and have poor transport links. There's insufficient sewage capacity, as staff has just highlighted, and a new sewer is likely to be required. There are insufficient schools, health and dental provision. They're also connected to Beggarwood is connected, and these are likely to be to the Dummer telephone exchange, and so have no high-speed broadband. They're close to the Sainsbury's superstore, but in fact the car park there saturates at most peak shopping periods. These sites will be in addition to developments that are already likely or were approved at Kempshott Park Industrial Estate and the Beggarwood Area Inn. Both of these already will increase the pressure on the existing highway and other infrastructure. No highway data exists for the
30 seconds.
The connection between the Beggarwood lights, where all these are likely to connect, and the M3 and the Southwood Junction. Southwood Junction has a very poor history and is likely to cause major problems when 50% of the traffic already travels towards the motorway to work elsewhere in the peak period. These sites should be removed from the LDA.
Julian, thank you very much indeed. Next, I have John Rotherer. Good evening. Could you press the long... That's perfect.
Good evening, Chairman.
And you have...
just before I begin, I am going to talk about Many Down too. Is that okay?
That is fine, because we're going to move on and take all these sites together with Many Down, because I have just two speakers on Many Down, so you'll be a perfect introduction to the Many Down subject.
I represent the Kempshott and District Residents Association, which is the longest established residents association in Basingstoke, and which has a membership of over 520 households every year, and which pay an annual subscription. The association is very concerned about three of the sites: Many Down Parcel 6, and then Kennel Farm and the golf course. And we would ask that these are removed from the plan. Parcel 6 of Many Down is being proposed in splendid isolation from the remainder of the Many Down area, which creates major development problems. It is hemmed into the north by the railway and by existing development to the east. Therefore, the only possible vehicular access is from Pack Lane, either from the west, which requires the using the very narrow and low tunnel under the railway, and which is therefore restricted to one-way traffic, or from the east, which necessitates using the five-way traffic junction. Access from either direction is clearly not suitable for traffic generated by an additional 750 dwellings. Much of this traffic would head eastwards along Pack Lane, passing dozens of dwellings with direct accesses to the lane, and which would then proceed to the already highly congested Brighton Hill roundabout, which is already under pressure to accommodate thousands of extra traffic movements generated by other developments now proposed. I take the other two sites, Kennel Farm and the golf course, in tandem. We're worried about these for various reasons and cannot understand how they could be given Category 1 status. There are 1,250 dwellings generating significant additional traffic movements, producing yet more congestion at Brighton Hill. Housing being built on the two sites, which of all the proposed Basingstoke types are located at furthest distance from the town centre and the employment areas, contrary to the sustainability objectives of the plan. Both sites comprise grades 2 and 3A agricultural land, the most versatile agricultural land. The destruction of the well-treed and well-located Basingstoke golf course, which up to now has been regarded as a major asset to the
Time,
town.
I'm afraid.
Have I finished?
You have.
Oh.
You've had your 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Sorry. Did you have much more you wanted to add?
I only had a little more.
Could you say it in one sentence?
Well, I was going to mention again this terrible business of breaking the ridgeline in this position. Once you break this ridgeline, everything is open to development. You will end up very shortly, if you do, with applications for major warehouses around Junction 7.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll then go on to, as we've moved on to Manydown, we'll take the whole lot together. George Elkin.
Good evening. George Elkin, representing Oakley and Dean Parish Council. I'm speaking on the proposed allocation of 200 houses to Oakley, and also on parcel 6 of Manydown. I think, if I'll start with Manydown, which is the opposite way around, as we've just finished. As regards parcel 6, which is i.e. the land to the south of the railway line, we believe the traffic implications from developing this site to be horrendous. It would require significant upgrades to Five Ways Junction and the railway bridges. Your own Planning and Infrastructure Overview and Scrutiny Committee, at their meeting the 21st of January, recorded a general rejection of this site. Your EPP Oscom was also in favour of only developing north of the railway line. If I can move to my main reason for being here, which is Oakley. Certainly not the same allocation as elsewhere, but still very important to us. The Parish Council accepts the need for additional housing, in particular for 1 to 2 bedroom units for the younger and older population, this making available the larger houses, the latter currently occupied for use by families. Following a number of surveys and public meetings, the Parish Council identified the need for 150 houses over the plan period. This was the figure originally put forward in the earlier draft of the local plan. During the final consultation for the previous plan last year, we spent a considerable time looking at the sites being considered within Oakley settlement boundary to accommodate the required 150 new houses and planning how the development might proceed. A key consideration for us was that any development would be on a bus route and near some of the village facilities. Adding a further 33% will be the difference between successful integration of these houses and not. Oakley has already had a 15-fold increase in housing, compared with only 4-fold increase in the
30
town.
seconds.
Any new houses will create extra car traffic, especially as we do not have a railway station. Oakley also has limited infrastructure facilities. The schools, doctors' surgeries, etc. are already stretched. Our post office has recently been downgraded, so now that we have for a number of services, we have to drive to either Overton or Basingstoke. In my few seconds, just to say, yes, we have plans for the 150 as part of the neighbourhood scheme, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, Councillor Bierman, you said that you wanted to speak on general sites, but with an emphasis on Manydown. Is this an appropriate moment? Yep, that's fine.
Thank you, as always, for the opportunity to speak. I wanted to just, as you say, look at the overall situation. I think with the alleged introduction of localism, I do feel that Overton and Whitchurch have been seriously dumped upon. I cannot understand how they can possibly come up with meaningful responses to the allocations in a matter of days, and yet we have had years to look at Manydown. And it is my view that Overton and Whitchurch have been dumped upon because they were cooperative and said, yes, we'll take some houses, and they weren't squealing at the time, and now they're being pushed until they squeal, and it's not surprising they have. I'm pleased that Manydown, it seems now to include Worting, and also that the plans show the wider Manydown area. That's useful. But interestingly, I agree with Mr. Rotherer and the other speaker, to take parcel 6 out and develop that individually is a total nonsense and goes against the whole thrust of having a comprehensive development plan for the whole of Manydown. It should be done as one and not taking bits. Otherwise, it undermines the purpose of having bought it in that way. I'd therefore like to suggest that we look again at Manydown. It's been suggested by planning officers that we can't cope with more than 300 houses per annum. I submit that though there is evidence that it's very difficult to do that in the traditional style, we do have the opportunity of new housing technology, whereby people build houses off-site, bring them on-site, and then it's a matter of days before they've put them up, and that gets over part of the problem of dealing with access to site. And anyway, we have a situation where we're looking at a major development area around Chinham, and it seems to be all possible to do the overall introduction of the yes, I know at the time, the overall introduction of houses in a short scale of time. Manydown is a nice, long, thin site. You've got many access points, and I submit that doing that is certainly no worse than doing all the houses around Chinham, but is preferable because you can plan and bring in the major infrastructural improvements that you need in terms of the distributor road, and yet and the other infrastructural requirements without damaging the rest of the area around it. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you very much. Right. I think that is everybody who wishes to speak on these sites in this area. Councillor Sherlock, do you want to summarise as best you can those points, and then I'll throw the by members.
Thank you, Leader. I'll try and deal with Manydown first. Where did we start? It was, yes, it was P&I rejected and EPP rejected it on the plot 6 on the grounds of traffic. Again on, no, that wasn't, schools, health, but mainly traffic. Yeah, I've got that one down. On 114 and 132, there were major risks for the sewer works and the highways justification of works. And the golf course is not a necessarily done deal, and it's still open to negotiation. Congestion at Brighton Hill, agricultural land, disintegration of the golf course, and breaking the ridge line. And then for Oakley, we had 150 homes had been identified previously, and integration would be unlikely with the numbers suggested. And again, the schools and surgeries were pushed as they are. Again, going back to Manydown, suggestion of how the officers' limit of 250 to 300 houses at any one time could be overcome by what I assume are kit houses, or bringing them on the back of a lorry. And that's about it.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We can pick up some of the other points in our notes anyway. Councillor Misic.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to reiterate that this, of course, tonight is not a final decision on the sites that will go forward. This is work in progress and it's about next steps. And I totally agree with what the speakers have just said about there's a lot more work that needs to be done, and we can't ignore the fact that the housing number's not even final at this point. Infrastructure is a huge issue, and building over the ridgeline is an issue, and I take on board all the concerns that have just been raised. And I'd like to thank Councillor Sherlock for taking out the word agreed, which I think reassures us all that these sites are not agreed, and want to also make sure that the officers and Councillor Sherlock do take into account all of the concerns that were just raised, especially in respect of Parcel 6 of Many Down and the issues that that could cause. So.
Thank you very much.
I'll reserve my comments for the debate later.
Okay, fine. My apologies. I've had it on most of the night accidentally, and now I've forgotten to put it on when I needed it on. Right, we'll move on now then to BAS 121, East of Basingstoke, and also SOL 002, such as if it needs to be included. I have first of all Peter Blois. Good evening. Do you like to press the long bar? That's it. And
Good
you have
evening.
2 minutes.
Right, I'm here on behalf of Country Watch tonight. First of all, we welcome the deletion of SOL 002. It's something Country Watch have been campaigning against for some time. We will continue to oppose development on BAS 121 throughout the process as it goes forward. No more to be said on that, but there are some points here I'd like to make on behalf of Country Watch. First of all, the borough-wide green policy, where is it? Is a prime document in the local plan process and fundamental to deciding which sites can or cannot be considered for valid green reasons. It should include, amongst others, important ecosystems, floodplains, landscape, noise, light pollution, archaeology, infrastructure, and so on. To make it clear, we are not just talking about green corridors in a sea of houses. We want a proper green policy, otherwise a local plan could be rendered unsound. Second point, Tadley. Now, I'm glad to see Councillor Donnell's mention of Tadley there. This is the second largest settlement in the borough, and it should take its fair share of houses. Country Watch believes that the officers have accepted far too eagerly the advice from the Office of Nuclear Regulation. We would like to see more evidence to back this up. Country Watch believes that the ONR opinion is based primarily on nuclear power station standards, a totally different scenario. The decision by the current Secretary of State Eric Pickles to agree to the Boundary Hall development puts the whole matter into perspective, and his decision notice is well worth reading. Developers certainly will. His decision vindicates the officer's recommendation at the time that the site should be developed. Country Watch is pursuing this further with the help of MPs and councillors.
Sorry, 30 seconds.
Lastly, housing numbers. As we understand it, the total housing numbers across the borough is still a work in progress. The Chairman repeated that earlier on. The Cabinet have a paper arguing for lower housing numbers, complete with evidence from our friends in Solve. Now that the South East Plan has at last been revoked, today I understand, you should not consider the 945 in the borough as an option. The inspector won't. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I have Councillor Mrs. Cubitt. Good evening.
Good evening, members. This decision, Notice 794, should not be approved by you tonight. Firstly, it is technically unsound, and secondly, I believe there's a simple solution to many of the problems that have been raised tonight. It is technically unsound as the requirements of the MPPF as per paras 100 and 101 have not been adhered to. The sequential tests in relation to flood risk assessments has not been applied, and this site allocation is in direct contravention of the MPPF. BAS 121, which scores the highest at a ranking of 8, has been selected, whilst available Category 1 sites that score lower rankings have been discarded. So given that Councillor Sherlock has said that this is not an agreed list, I urge you to consider those sites which are not on the list at the moment because they have lower rankings than 121. Possibly more importantly, I'd like to talk about the simple solution. The Conservatives, of which I am one, retained overall control of this borough last May on the back of a promise that we had reduced the target number of houses to be built in the borough from 945 to 594. Then on the 30th of October last year, you, the Cabinet, reneged on your Conservative electoral promise. You collectively voted to support an increase, albeit interim, in the target to 730 to 770. So what I would like you to do, and I urge you in this simple solution, is to honour the promise that you made to the Basingstoke residents, which got you elected and retained the majority that you have. Fight with every sinew, every fibre in your body, and with the political legitimacy that you have to lower the housing numbers. Use the land that was bought explicitly for the purpose
30 seconds.
Of building houses, and instruct the officers to build a case for lowering the number of houses and give them every resource that they need to ensure that the low number of houses is achieved. And with the 594, given that we have a need for council houses, because we have land that was bought with taxpayers' money, we could easily have 594 whilst building 300 council houses per annum, which would mean that we would sort out the affordable homes problem, and it would also mean that we would be doing what we promised the electorate, which was defending the green fields of Basingstoke. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Mr. Little? Good evening. You'll need to press your button, and you have 2 minutes.
Hello. Yeah, thank you very much for allowing me to speak tonight. It's Tom Lytle from Piatt's Hill, resident there for nearly 9 years now. There's concern within the medical press about people living near an incinerator and sewage treatment works. It brings up the risk that one should consider, including the cabinet members, yourself, whether or not you would live near such facilities, and as such, why would you have residents scheduled to live on BAS 121? I have a recommendation, if you would, based on 31 years in the pharmaceutical industry in clinical research, where the council could accept, and this cabinet could accept, the recommendations of the planning officers. If the Hampshire County Council, the Basingstoke Council, and the builders can finance a health monitoring of all the residents of BAS 121 for a period of no less than 10 to 15 years, overseen by a panel of medical experts, then you can compare the incidence of diseases between the residents of BAS 121 and a control group of residents elsewhere living a safe distance from the sewage works and incinerator. It reads like a horror story. The following diseases should be looked at: upper and respiratory lower diseases, including any form of cancer, pregnancy rates, which are lower in proximity to these facilities, incidents of birth defects,
30
miscarriages, stillbirths, death shortly after birth is horrible. Incidents of neural tube defects, including spinal bifida, heart defects, and infants that manage to stay alive. Now, the thing that I would like to say in conclusion, you've had two recommendations from two independent planning and infrastructure committees, one by Councillor Reid, one by Councillor Raphael, which recommends the removal of BAS 121 for other reasons apart from medical reasons. And I would urge you as the cabinet to take this, because I know you're all concerned about healthy living and the residents in and around the area. So I urge you to support the recommendations.
Thank you very much. Now I have Mr. Newlin, Elliot Newlin. If not, then I think that completes the full list of public speakers, unless there's anybody who is still wishing to speak. Ah. Oh, you ought to be confirmed. Right. Did you? Sorry. Well, then do come forward and... That wasn't a religious statement, by the way.
Too late for that.
Is that true? I don't have
Yes,
no
I-
idea. Right, you have 2 minutes.
Kate Tuck, Solve. I refer you to Solve's previous comments on these issues and will confine myself tonight to 2 points. 1. I would urge members to question why the principle of sequential testing for flood risk has not been consistently applied across all sites. 2. A potential solution to much of the debate tonight is to reduce the housing numbers. Statistical evidence shows that a lower number can be justified to a planning inspector. Our MP also supports a precautionary approach to housing numbers, i.e. lower numbers, given the number of issues around infrastructure, water and sewerage and transport networks that remain unresolved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. That does conclude then all the public speakers. Councillor Sherlock, would you like briefly to summarise the points made on the last sites, and then we'll move on.
Question of where is the green policy? Then we move to Tadley and the Office of Nuclear Regulation, and could officers not be more robust in negotiating with them? We then moved to housing numbers, which you mentioned, and you said that Solve had sent us both the figures and the calculations. We've never received the calculations. Well, I haven't got them. I haven't got them, I promise you. Yeah, the actual numbers, but not the calculations of how you got to them.
Can I just intervene and say that I'm sure you would supply them again if necessary? It would be helpful.
That was numbers, no calculations. Yes, numbers, we ought to reduce them to 594, and we ought to look at the lower rankings of categories again. Then Councillor Cubitt with the sequential testing and building on Manydown. That was followed by the incinerator and sewage works and having a 10-year health screening campaign to see how the people live. Then that's about it, I think.
Good. Thank you. Then, members, I think I would ask you to Two things. Firstly, we're 5 minutes late in suspending standing orders. Are we agreed that we will suspend standing orders and continue? Good, because otherwise I would force you to do so. In that case, what I would ask you to do is, you by all means cover specific comments on the last sites, but I ask you also to try and summarise your views on everything that we've heard tonight as we go through. Who would like to kick off? Nobody. Councillor Golding, thank you.
Thank you. Just I'd say I entirely agree with Kate Tuck that if we could get the number down, it would be highly desirable. I also want to repeat what I said earlier. I thank Councillor Sherlock for agreeing to delete the word agreed. Otherwise, this would not have had my support. The list in this list is certainly not agreed by me. In some respects, I think the list put forward by officers was better than the one we have tonight. But given that all that we are doing, I recognise that we do need to move forward and get on with getting the infrastructure information that we need before we can make a final decision. 18 months ago, we approved a list, and we were assured that we would get more information about the infrastructure implications, and it all got sidetracked by the legal proceedings, and we never got that information. So there was a lot of information that I think we need before we make a final decision as to what sites should go in the local plan, and if the infrastructure cannot be provided to support these sort of numbers, then the numbers will have to come down. In particular, because I want this on the record, I think the biggest gap is the transport assessment. In 2009, the chief executive of this council, the chief executive of Hampshire County Council, told us in a report that the LPA is working with HCC and the Highways Agency to assess the ability of the transport network to accommodate development and determine the most sustainable locations for development, including looking at the impacts of further development on the strategic highway network. And we were told on the next page that in particular they're re-examining the transport connections to the west of Basingstoke. We desperately need the result of that work. We have site on Rooksdown already approved through the local plan for several hundred houses. We have over 3,000 proposed here for Manydown and Worthing. We have 200 proposed for Oakley. We have 250 for Kennel Farm. We have 1,000 for the golf club. We already have 2 sites that are about to put in planning applications that are within the settlement policy boundary on Beggarwood. That is a huge, colossal number of housing, and all those, the residents of all those, if they want to get to Basingstoke town centre, will have to go through Thornycroft roundabout. We need a proper analysis of the combined implication of all those sites before we make any decisions. So I am content, reluctantly, to go along with this just so that that work can continue. And in particular, it's impossible to reach a judgment on parcel 6 of Manydown. If there is to be a new road across the railway that links into parcel 6, it's not isolated. If it's there without a new road across the railway, with the totally inadequate pack lane, then I will agree with the folks who said it should not be developed. I've already mentioned my sympathy with a lot of what was said about Overton. The Oakley, again, I should have raised this point earlier, but I don't think Cabinet has been provided with a detailed explanation of how the 150 became 200, and I see that this the decision notice does ask officers to do more work, presumably with the Parish Council in Oakley, to find out what exactly is their thinking on Oakley, and I shall want to see the outcome of that before making a final decision in relation to Oakley. And the last thing I want to say, because is in relation to the golf course. The golf course is in my ward, and it's the second largest site on this list, so I think I'm entitled to have some say about it. There are 5 objections primarily to the golf course. I'm not going to list them all. It is, as already been mentioned, the furthest Basingstoke site from the sewage treatment works. It's the wrong side of a ridge line. Thames Water have already confirmed that you cannot route the sewage through the town centre because there is already a risk of flooding from the sewers in the town centre. So you're going to have to build a new sewer all the way around the west of the town or all the way around the south of the town, possibly crossing the M3 twice. The cost of that is likely to be prohibitive, but if we prove tonight, we can at least get a figure for the cost and let the golf club members decide whether that's something they could afford.
It's also the furthest site from Basing View, which is our focus regeneration, and makes a nonsense of trying to reduce journey times to work. That, along with Kennel Farm and the Beggarwood sites, is far more than the A30 could cope with. We know from Tesco's application, which is currently being considered, that even sorting out Brighton Hill roundabout would cost millions. Then there's the roundabouts at Sainsbury's, Kempshott, the need to fill in the missing bits of the dual carriageway, and again you get round to Thornycroft roundabout. And finally, very briefly, I'm glad that we were not under time limits. Very briefly, we need a golf course. There is I think, arguably a slight overcapacity of golf courses at the moment, but we're planning to 2029 on the basis that the population is going to increase very substantially, and the proportion of that population which is elderly, and I understand attracted to golf, is going to increase very substantially. So we need the golf course. And the biggest argument is the uncertainty. There is absolutely no certainty that once it's all costed, the members will vote to proceed with development, and we are supposed to be picking the most certain sites. So that's my say. Thank you, Leader. Very much. Who wishes to speak now? Yep. Kathy, do you want to? Ladies first, I think.
Thank you. I've been taking copious notes throughout from all the speakers, and the theme that I'm picking up running through everything is traffic congestion, traffic and water, school runs, cycles, sewage, incinerators, schools again, doctors' surgeries, footpaths, walkers, parking, health, one's quality of life, ecology, flood risk, and your sequential test, your green policy, your Tadley and its nuclear reactor, etc., lower housing numbers, businesses may go, railway station, shops, communities, affordable housing. And you also want to put more houses on Manydown. Now, this is a theme that's running through everything that I've heard tonight. So I think it is important, before any decision is made, that we do what is said in this notice, and we go forward for research-based knowledge, so that everyone, that you provide us with the knowledge, or we provide the knowledge here, that with regards to transport, things like that, and infrastructure, and it comes back before, as we say, we will not be making a decision tonight. It's a decision on infrastructure, and that's the threads that I've picked up, and I will await to see what the results are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Donnell.
Thank you, Leader. First of all, I'd like to echo Councillor Golding's comments and thanking Councillor Sherlock for removing the phrase agreed, because otherwise I couldn't have supported this either. I do think we need to go forward on the infrastructure, and especially during the contributions from the Overton or Whitchurch residents. I was taking notes, and almost everything they said could be applicable to every site. And at this, I make no apology. I'm going to talk about the sites that affect mostly my ward. The ones they said the infrastructure not fulfilled under the local plan. Yes. It wasn't fulfilled over the local plan, and we cannot make those mistakes again for this borough. We have to ensure that the infrastructure comes before or with housing, not years later. It was fantastic to see in the ward next to mine, Rookstown, the opening of the Rookstown Village Hall only a few months ago. Years after that development started, we cannot let that sort of thing happen again. There will be, wherever we are, impact on historic or archaeological impact. Manydown includes archaeological sites of Roman remains. We do need to catch our breath, both the villages but also the town. In our recent residents' survey, the residents came back very clearly saying they wish to slow down the pace of development. I agree about building on skylines, totally agree. We should preserve the views of this town. And I'll talk about the landscape study going forward. On sewage, my own ward suffers from sewage outfall, and also the whole of Manydown seems to be dependent on a 6-inch sewer running down Wellington Terrace. My local schools are full because we didn't get the infrastructure right when we built Rookstown. Castle Hill, Winklebury residents can't get into any longer, and it's in the centre of Winklebury. Now, Our doctor surgery's been shut. All the borough needs this infrastructure with development. And as for traditional boundaries, you can't get more traditional than the road made by the Romans. But it all comes down to the infrastructure must come first. I believe one of the biggest pinch points in the whole of Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council is the Worting Road Bridge. It's virtually a single entry under a bridge. We have to change that if we're to go forward. We've got to get this right. We do need to do a huge amount of future work. The landscape study hasn't been mentioned before, though I continually bring it up. Our landscape study gives credit to animals looking at rural areas. It gives credit to rural people looking at the town and rural people looking at rural views, and completely excludes the rights of urban people to look at the countryside. It's not even mentioned. The town residents have equal rights and responsibilities, and those should be considered in the landscape capacity studies. Our water cycle currently does not cover the last 2 years of our local plan, and we need to relook at that. Our transport study has already been brought up again. And we come back to Tadley. It is ridiculous that the second largest settlement in this borough cannot take housing, despite the wants of that. And I do believe we need to be incredibly vigorous and forceful with the authorities to push on this one. Housing numbers, as has been mentioned by members of the audience and councillors, are the key to this. I personally also agree with our local MP that we need to take a precautionary level. I do believe we need lower housing numbers in this borough. And to quote Councillor Cubitt, I for one will certainly be straining every sinew that I have to get those numbers lower. I truly believe that, and I know I'm joined by many members of the Cabinet in that. That's why I can't support this if it was an agreed list. I can support it because we need to get this infrastructure work done now, because if this council comes out like plans, like it did at the last local plan, with the inspector throws out, it would be terrible. If this council comes up with plans for Manydown, like the last ones, there's no way I'm supporting it. They were wrong for the borough, and they were wrong for my local residents. And I'm pleased that this administration has committed itself to respecting the rights of the local community and not holding mock consultations with 3 or 4 days notice just after a holiday like the last administration does. So I can support this because we need to step forward and we need to ensure that we get the infrastructure before or at the same time as housing development.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Really just very briefly to say what I said earlier, that we do need to move forward to allow all this important work to be done so that we can make proper decisions later on, and infrastructure is extremely important.
Thank you. If nobody else wishes to, just before you move the recommendation, presumably, can I just put in my 2 pennyworth, or did you wish to add a few more points yourself? No? Can I firstly thank everybody who's contributed tonight. It has been a very useful, I think, and very positive and very well argued case by everybody. A lot of good points have been put forward which will require serious consideration, and I don't want anybody to believe the arguments which it is a done deal and don't worry what they say, they'll just go away and do something else. That is not the way that I do things, and that's not the way I expect the council to do things. We try and do the best that we can in an honest way. If you listened to it and going through my notes, what you find is that everybody has managed to put forward a very coherent argument for not developing on any of the sites at all, anywhere. That is not an option if we wish to provide housing for our children and our children's children in the foreseeable future, given the inexorable growth that there is within the population. People are just breeding more at the moment, if we look at what's happening in the primary schools. And they will need housing in the fullness of time. So we do have to find sites to develop. What we want to try and do is to make sure that we find the best sites to develop, and a very key part of that is the question of infrastructure and the whole range of ancillary studies which need to go with that. It is vital that we have those if we're going to make a sensible judgment. What this proposal tonight, I think, does do is move us forward. I listened to what was being said about Overton. I have certain concerns myself about parts of Overton. I could equally reflect some of the concerns about parts of Whitchurch. My point is that a lot of the questions which are being raised there will be answered by these studies, particularly the transport study, where people have been dealing with the roads issue. It would be wrong to be leaping to conclusions until we have all the evidence on which to base our judgments. Similarly, I could very easily share the view on housing numbers, but the number that we come up with has to be justifiable at an inquiry. We have to have a rational basis for it. I'm afraid this is what we want will not do. We have to find a better argument than that. It doesn't do under the MPPF, the planning framework. It doesn't do under any rational approach. And no, it doesn't matter how loud we say it, it still won't do. We have to come with a figure that will be justified by fact and proper analysis, and that is what we are working towards. But the housing number is not the subject that we are dealing with this evening. I similarly would support any challenge that we can make to get Tadley back into the frame, so that, because people in Tadley themselves want development, and we are pushing for it, and we should continue to push for it, and push for it very vigorously. The final point I would make is to reiterate something which I said earlier, which is to draw your attention to point 2 in the appendix to the decision notice, which very clearly states that infrastructure is vital to sustainable development and must be delivered in advance or alongside development. We have in our power to put in place the necessary policies that even though we allocate sites, they will never be developed if we don't get that infrastructure in place. It is possible to do that now in a way that it wasn't possible to do it under previous policies. It will only happen if we make sure that we devise the very toughest and best policies that we can do. That is something which I think we need to look at again. But this whole process now should go away. If we don't send it away as a decision notice now to do the work, we won't have the information. It will come back again in May to Planning and Infrastructure Committee to give them a full chance to look at all the information that has been gathered in that time and to re-evaluate the proposals which officers will bring forward at that stage in the context of what their research has produced. And then it will in turn come through to Cabinet and then finally through to full council before it goes out for consultation. So it will have been about as exhaustively dealt with through the democratic process as it is possible to deal with it. I can foresee now that it will not ever please everybody in its entirety. That is absolutely guaranteed. What we have to do is to find the best solution that matches as much as we can of the requirements which we can justify to the available land that is on offer to us to develop. On that basis, that this is work that we desperately need to do to enable us to move forward, I find myself able to support the proposal as they are, subject to the amendment which you have made. Is anybody, do you wish to add any more before we? If not, I will ask.
I just think, it might interest you, but I think that the government and the planning inspectorate are singing from different hymn sheets. You get the inspectors, and we've had our calculations checked out, still looking for big numbers. They just turned down, well, they didn't turn it down, they accepted Winchester's local plan, but subject to a further 1,500 houses, which they had the availability for, being added onto it. And that, to my mind, is not what the government is saying to us at all. But I just thought I'd add that in before I'd like to formally propose to move the amendment.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Then that is moved, seconded. Are we agreed? subject to the deletion of the word, so as amended, and we will collect from the webcast and no doubt from the copious notes that everybody's been making the relevant points which have been made at each stage and publish those as a separate appendix to the minutes of the meeting. And since those points will actually act as a trigger to officers to look at specific instances, I would suggest that those who have been kind enough to contribute this evening should look at those points to make sure that they have been accurately and faithfully recorded. It's been a long meeting up until now, and you will forgive us if we haven't got them necessarily 100% correct the first time round, but you have the time to contribute and make those amendments if necessary. So, at that point then, we are agreed on that as a paper. That concludes discussion on item 13. Thank you all very much for attending. If you wish to, we have one more and then we have another meeting. So you're more than welcome to stay for the committee of the council, but I will understand if you don't. Right then, we shall continue with the meeting, and can I just draw your attention, members, please, to item 14, matters dealt with by portfolio holders under delegated powers. Not, well, it's just for noting, so that's all we need to do. In which case, the cabinet meeting of the 28th of February is now concluded at 9:56, and we move seamlessly on to a meeting of the committee of the council. I think we can take the first two items, the fire procedures and the webcasting of the meeting, as read. Receive apologies for absence. It should be recorded that both Councillor Finney and Councillor Isett and Councillor Jaya-Wardner give their apologies. Declarations of conflict of interest, anybody? No? I would confirm within that we are able to do this even though we are council tax payers, but this is under the dispensation that has been granted to us, so that is not a problem. It would seem that there are no members of the public who wish to participate on this item. And therefore, can we move to paper B, which does require somebody to move it, and since the relevant member of the council is not actually here to do so, I will do it on his behalf. You've all had a chance to read the council tax. I think the only point which I would say is that it is very heartening to see that yet again, for I think it's the fourth year running now, we have been able to hold the level of council tax as a result of very prudent and sensible management of the organisation and the way that we deliver our services. We intend to continue that by holding our council tax again next year. Just to note that there have been I think one increase in the precept, which is for the police and crime panel, or rather it's actually for the police and crime commissioner. That should be amended, that I think, but because it's actually the commissioner who asks for it rather than the crime panel. But with that said, is everybody happy to agree this? In which case, members, I can draw at 10 o'clock